Chapter 521. Unifying the World, Forging Ahead. The 210,000 refugees crammed into the transport ships were Gu Heng's spoils of war on the political battlefield, all destined to be relocated to live on Rage Owl Star. This was a legitimate value. 5 tax currency per person was the pricing set by the Empire. Taken to Rage Owl Star, even if they did absolutely nothing but set up refugee camps to sustain these people, after 2 years, once the imperial tax was paid, it could offset 1 million in tax currency. But how did these people come about? Firstly, it was the Tianma star sector's various planets. Looting Corollia. Before Galaraldo disappeared, Corollia's situation was already deteriorating. Many of the learned in the star sector could tell that. Under the call of the star sector government, the governors of each planet, some other forces within the planets, and even the wealthy were all generously digging into their pockets, providing some manageable relief for Corollia 3. It was mainly in the form of various supplies. Similarly, many forces that provided supplies also generously expressed that they could accept refugees from Corollia 3 who had become homeless due to turmoil and had nowhere else to be placed. That was surely extortion. The majority of the forces generously donated supplies to support Corollia 3 that were not even worth as much as the population they plundered from Corollia 3. But the Corollia 3 planetary government had no choice but to accept. They desperately needed those supplies, or else military operations would lack provisions, and the civilians' lives would be affected. Moreover, those homeless refugees, who had emerged due to outbreaks of the plague demon, truly existed. It was more manageable elsewhere, but Pheno City, having fallen by more than half, was facing the gravest issue. There were originally 1 billion people there, half of them in occupied zones. Their fate, only death, transformation into plague walkers, or infection, these were the 3 outcomes. But in the non-occupied zones, there were still hundreds of millions of people. They should, of course, be evacuated from areas that could become battlegrounds at any time, but that was hundreds of millions of people, and moving them to other nest capitals was extremely difficult. All along, Corollia 3 had always been in a state of having too many people and not enough resources. Trying to evacuate so many people, finding places that could take this many people, that was very hard. They could only establish refugee camps and quarantine zones in some of the slightly more upper-level areas of Pheno City. All zones were managed by classification, divided into high-risk, medium-risk, low-risk, and no-risk infection zones, with strict barriers between each zone. All areas were placed under military management, with civilians not allowed to leave their homes not even if they faced starvation. After reporting, those without typical infection symptoms within 7 days could be moved to a lower-risk zone, all the way down to the no-risk zones. But in reality, no-risk zones only meant a very low risk of infection, it was not necessarily safe. The problem of scarcity of supplies always plagued the quarantine zones in Pheno City's refugee camps. Additionally, regardless of the risk level of the area, there was always the danger of the plague demon breaking through the military defenses and directly taking over. There was also the risk of a sudden large-scale outbreak of the epidemic. Therefore, under such circumstances, the most beneficial course of action for the Corollia planetary government really was to sell people to other planets and powers. Not selling them meant they would find it tough to provide for and could be doomed at any moment. But they had to sell at a reasonable price, right? When all was calculated, other forces generally exchanged supplies worth about 0.2 to 0.5 tax currency to take away a population worth 5 tax currency per person. Was this not robbery? Of course, with Corollia as the nest capital planet that held 400 billion inhabitants, amounting to 62.2% of the entire Tianma star sector's population, its government was one of the most powerful planetary governments. Moreover, Governor Akuna was a staunch supporter of the Tianma leader, Pei Desi, belonging to the same faction. They certainly would not accept being robbed so easily. But, who could blame Akuna and Pei Desi, 2 core figures whose own hands were not very clean? Now, with the disappearance of Galaraldo causing much trouble, their political influence, which was once great, would be lucky to retain even 2 or 3/10 of its former strength. There was quite a lot of political struggle and compromise involved. And the outcome that was ultimately negotiated was that each power could obtain a certain quota of migration population for free based on their support for Corollia 3, exceeding this quota would require purchasing with tax currency. The purchase price was determined using a tiered mechanism, ranging from 1 to 4 tax currency per person. There were discounts offered but at the same time, it restricted those powers from plundering Corollia 3 too excessively. Gu Heng was involved in the negotiation process for this matter. Therein, he naturally stood from his own perspective, on behalf of Rage Owl Star, trying to gain as much advantage as possible. But outside of this matter, Gu Hang sometimes detached himself emotionally and reflected on the situation. During Karolia III's major disasters, when countless citizens of the empire were afflicted, the ideal of all parties working together to face a natural disaster existed only on the surface. Behind closed doors, this had turned into a feast of dividing interests and feasting on the division of Karolia III. Various big hots engaged in backstabbing and verbal combat, greedily feeding off the ravages of a disaster. Gu Hang could not stand on the moral high ground to criticize these events, as he was one of those partaking in the feast. But was there anything good from start to finish in this matter? Chapter 522. The various forces that were dividing up the population benefits of Karolia III were certainly acting with the intention of looting amidst chaos. The planetary government of Karolia III was no cleaner, the population had become their bargaining chip for obtaining benefits. They did not think about how to preserve more human lives but were instead willing to place refugees in camps with enormous risks, where they could face death at any moment, rather than allow them to live in better places. Only those people who were facing risks, who were inadequately clothed and underfed, who had lost their homes, were truly struggling the most. Gu Hang couldn't change the entire environment, but what he could do was to ensure that those who were relocated to Rage Owl Star could start living a life befitting a human again. All the people on the ship came from risk-free areas and had gone through the quarantine process. Gu Hang also did not want to bring aboard people with contagious diseases, otherwise, there was a good chance that everyone on the ship would die before even reaching Rage Owl Star, and they might even bring the plague there. Of the 210,000 people, half came from the free population provided to Karolia III by Rage Owl Star. This was the free population quota that Gu Hang obtained after getting involved in political activities on the side while participating in the investigation team's work. The other 110,000 people came from the Rage Bear Legion. They were directly involved in frontline combat, with several refugee camps within their defense areas. Li Kexi and the commanders of the local Karolia forces, in collusion, sold off this batch of people. After all, if the Karolia government could sell the people without sharing the money with the military, why couldn't the native military forces sell them on their own? The price was very cheap. The Karolia government's lowest price was 1 tax currency per person, but these native military forces were willing to sell for 0.6 tax currency. Moreover, with the authority Li Kexi had over them, and after applying both soft and hard tactics, the price was directly pushed down to 0.2 tax currency per person. For these 110,000 people, Gu Hang spent just over 20,000 tax currency. What's the difference from getting them for free? After drifting in the Star Sea for 7 days, the group finally arrived at Rage Owl Star. A war merchant ship belonging to the Gu commercial firm, a transport ship, docked at the small port on Rage Owl Star. 210,000 people disembarked, heading to the ground. Some materials were loaded onto the ships, ready to be transported to Karolia, making the entire port start bustling with activity. But of course, Gu Hang didn't have to squeeze in there. He left the starport ahead of everyone else, taking the investigative team and the representatives of the investors, heading to the ground. Lady Asana, the Alliance Premier, Major General Tadeus, the Chief Political Commissar of the entire army, and Lambert Hodgson, the Grand Justice, the 3 figures who could be considered the top leaders of the Alliance government, all came out to personally welcome their governor's return. After a brief reception banquet, the group boarded several Wind Falcons heading for Revival City. Lady Asana, who had already received the news, would dispatch a team from the Alliance Foreign Affairs Department and the Commercial Department to interface with the representatives of the investors. They would be taken to see the industrial center of Wuxing City on Rage Owl Star, then to visit the vast planting fields in the southern Green Valley region, and then return to Scarrow City to look at the construction situation of the starport. Surely, after viewing all this, they would provide a reasonable report to their masters about whether Rage Owl Star was worth investing in. As for the members of the investigative group, things were slightly more troublesome. Gu Hang couldn't afford to neglect them too much, so he simply took people on a trip to the Green Valley region first. This was also quite reasonable. They had come to investigate the status of the plague demon. With the investigation on Karolia III completely deadlocked, they were looking to see if they could find some other clues on Rage Owl Star. The Green Valley region, after all, was the starting point of that magical disaster a year and a half ago, so an investigation there was entirely sensible. However, after they went to the Green Valley region, how they would investigate was their own business. The Alliance government supported their work wholeheartedly, arranging for country villas with plenty of pure natural food, chefs, and servants. They would be able to enjoy the pastoral sceneries not easily seen in the nest capital or those civilized planets. There was no shortage of fine food and wine, and if they got bored, they could even go to the southern edge of the Viking Valley region to hunt some aberrant beasts for sport, investigative activities. Isn't this much more comfortable than squatting and waiting for the Sun Lord's investigation team to arrive in that treacherous place on Karolia No. 3? After settling in this batch of investigators, Gu Hang hurried back to Revival City. Faced with the arrival of those 210,000 refugees and the investors' team busying around, Ozania hastily put down her work to meet the governor and deliver a work report. The development of Rage Owl Star was of paramount importance, but Gu Hang did not need to hear much. In the past, they had generally maintained a communication frequency of at least once, and sometimes 3 times, per week. Although he was not on Rage Owl Star, he was well informed about the development of the alliance. Some particular key points could be discussed separately. For example, Wuxing City, as the industrial center, had seen its population grow to 5 million, having doubled versus just over a year ago. This was mainly due to people siphoned from other regions. Wuxing City's annual industrial output value had reached 11 million in tax currency, with per capita output exceeding 2, which was double the empire's standard for annual per capita output. The concept of one tax currency was originally set by the Central Empire government as the standard case of total annual output value of an empire citizen. Of course, this was just Wuxing City surpassing a per capita output value of 2, while other areas were far from it. Revival City, with 1.2 million people, only surpassed 1, the Viking Valley region, due to vast land resources and exceptionally high per capita planting area, was able to reach 1.9 in tax currency. Elsewhere, all fell short of 1. Another matter, and also a key point in Ozania's report, was the situation after the entire West Desert region, along with the Western Desert, had been reclaimed. After the elimination of Blackbird Heavy Industries, which occupied the western continent, the Alliance no longer had any enemies on Rage Owl Star. Rage Owl Star, with oceans comprising the majority of its area, had a very good natural environment before the war, with high living standards for its inhabitants, and could be considered a combination of a garden world and a high-grade resource planet. The entire planet's land area was only about 36%. The main part of the Alliance was located on the main continent, which was approximately 22% of the total area of the planet. There were 2 other continents, with areas of 9% and 5% of the planet's total area, respectively. However, while the main continent was battered, it still had lush regions like the Green Valley. Other lands with poor natural environments could still support inhabitants as long as the low-energy storms were avoided. Even the most hostile West Desert, with its sprinkling of oases and underground water systems, could supply the necessary water for the underground planting factories, sustaining a large population and even having the capacity to export food. On the other 2 continents, they were almost entirely unsuitable for human life. They were originally the primary sites for the extraction of spiritualized gas fields on Rage Owl Star, and now those 2 continents, along with the surrounding seas, were enshrouded in unceasing low-energy storms. According to past intelligence, there truly seemed to be no signs of life activity on those 2 continents. From this perspective, the Alliance could be considered to have definitively unified the entire world. Unified the whole world. Became a ruler of a planet in every sense of the word. Although this had been Gu Hang's goal since he arrived in this world 2.5 years ago, and he never doubted he would achieve it, when everything became a reality, he could not help but feel somewhat emotional. Before crossing over, as just an ordinary person, how could he have ever imagined that he would see such a day? However, Gu Hang did not feel very excited. Had it not been for the series of events triggered by Galaraldo, and the journey to Karolia, Gu Hang might have been more excited. But now, as the vast star sea was no longer just a background in his memory but had genuinely become the stage he was about to step onto, he realized how minuscule both he and the power of a single planet were in this context. There is no choice but to forge ahead. Chapter 523. The recovered western part of the continent was divided into 3 provinces, namely Baojun Province, Gushib Province, and Peninsula Province. The names were actually chosen quite arbitrarily. Baojun is the area where Blackbird City is located, named after the pre-war era city ruins that used to bear this name. Gushu is the northeastern part of the mainland, which has a very large ancient tree that surprises people, so they simply called it that. Peninsula is the southwestern part, which features a protruding peninsula. Altogether, the three provinces have a population of over 13 million people. In fact, according to past records, it should be close to 20 million. However, for one thing, the past statistics might have been problematic, and for another, under the rule of Blackbird Heavy Industries, a large number of people were transformed into semi-mechanical beings without consciousness, or they died during past surgeries, in labor, or in the wars against the Alliance. As for now, only 11 million remain. The other 2 million were, during the war, conveniently relocated to the heartland of the Alliance by the returning supply convoys. These displaced populations primarily supplemented two locations: Wuxing City and Biking Valley Province. These are also the two areas with the greatest demand for labor. As an industrial center, Wuxing City naturally needs no further explanation. The explosive development of its industries craves labor like a black hole. Biking Valley is not much better off. The region has a very high per capita output, but this output comes from massive per capita cultivated areas and strenuous labor. Even though Biking Valley has almost achieved complete mechanization and industrialization of agricultural production, the average agricultural worker still has too many fields to tend to, leading to excessively long working hours. Of course, agricultural workers in the Green Valley region are fully motivated to do so. Their efforts, under the Alliance's system, are rewarded. Based on their total work hours and output over the past year, almost everyone who worked normally received a promotion in their personal job grade by the end of the year, with going from E5 to E6 being a common occurrence, and even 30% of the people going directly to E7. Moving from E5 to E6 means a 50% increase in basic benefits and allowances. Reaching E7 is equivalent to doubling them. Originally, the benefits and allowances at the E5 level already far surpassed the living standards they had as serfs on plantations, where they lived almost like people. With a further increase of half or even double, the improvement in their quality of life was significant. This was the reward for their hard work, but Mr. Gu did not intend to let them maintain a working day of 14 hours, or even more, forever. The 1 million people arriving from the western three provinces would be able to alleviate some of the pressure. As for opening up more land, it still required a larger population. Currently, under the rule of the Unified Alliance, there are over 44 million people, with an annual total output value reaching 52 million tax currency. The per capita output has just exceeded 1, but only just. The main reason for this was the uneven development of production forces across Rage Owl Star. Biking Valley and Wuxing City are quite high, but other regions have not yet passed 1. According to the standards of the imperial tax, handing over a tenth as tax presents not only no pressure, but is also more than sufficient. At present, the per capita consumption level under the Alliance's rule is roughly 0.6 tax currency/person/year, which objectively speaking, is not a particularly high standard of living, roughly adequate for subsistence, a little short of modest comfort. But the citizens' satisfaction is very high. Although not wealthy, it's much stronger than struggling at the brink of survival as before. Happiness is relative. The current scale of consumption across Rage Owl Star is about 27 million tax currency, theoretically leaving a surplus value of 25 million. And the administrative efficiency of the Alliance is very high, able to collect 15 million of this surplus value into the Alliance finances. This is quite rare, and the contrast is telling. Karolia 3 has a population of 40 billion, with an annual output of at least 28 billion, a per capita consumption of 0.3, leaving a surplus value of 16 billion in tax currency. In theory, collecting 4 billion in imperial tax every year should be relatively easy. But the Karolia government simply cannot do it. At most, they manage to collect just over 20 billion each year, and the rest has to come from handing over populations. This is where the difference in administrative efficiency lies. The Alliance excels in this regard, mainly thanks to two factors. Firstly, it's a matter of the system. Under an economy that is mainly planned on an overarching scale, the rent-seeking class between the government and producers has been greatly eliminated. Factory owners, plantation owners, entrepreneurs. In essence, all of them are employees of the Alliance government. The means of production do not belong to these managers but to the Alliance. Their work enthusiasm is supplemented by rank promotions and extra allowances. There is no collection phase here, all output belongs to the government and is subject to government allocation. But if that was all there was to it, it wouldn't be enough. The number of administrative personnel in the Alliance is not high, but their efficiency is, thanks to persistent anti-corruption, anti-dereliction efforts, and incentive policies for administrative personnel. The whole society is currently operating in a highly efficient and clear political environment. Even so, a large amount of output has disappeared. 10 million in tax currency has neither entered the standard consumer spending nor the alliance's finances. The most up-to-date noves are published on Fruitnoelo. There are many reasons for this, with the service industry being the main one, as its output is not counted in the alliance's statistics. Following that, there are administrative costs, waste, spontaneous investments. But no matter what, the current situation of the alliance is more than capable of dealing with the imperial tax. As long as they reserve 1/3 of the fiscal budget each year and slow down investment growth, the entire alliance can enter into a normal cycle within the empire world. But Gu Heng has no intention of doing so. Under his direction, the alliance's fiscal budget remains maxed out, even running at a deficit in many areas. Mainly, it's about reinvesting into production. Under the alliance's system, although there is a certain level of private investment, which the government encourages, overall development still relies on large-scale, government-led investment. If they really slowed down, the imperial tax would take a big chunk, and military expenses another, leaving not enough for investments, and Gu Heng is unwilling to slow the pace of development. On the one hand, the industrial centers must continue to be built, on the other hand, the economic levels of other regions within the alliance need to rise. Of course, another important factor restraining the development of the entire planet is the population. Such a vast planet, with just over 40 million people, is still too few. Reliance on natural population growth is too slow. Despite many policies encouraging childbirth for the future, as for the present, immigration remains the most important avenue. The two largest channels of immigration are Hajian Star and Karolya 3. According to Gu Heng's plan, in the next 2 years, they aim to continuously bring in at least 10 million people from the outside. This is a huge challenge for the alliance government. Never mind how Mr. Gu will achieve this by then, government officials must be prepared to undertake the task of accommodating so many people. How to arrange it economically, how to clarify identities politically, how to resolve cultural disputes. The difficulties are numerous, and as the alliance premier, Ozania can only take a deep breath, then go ahead and make plans with determination. Chapter 524. To all residents of Rage Owl Star. I am your governor, Gu Heng. 2.5 years ago, when I came to this world, I promised the entire planet that I would save this world. I promised that I would establish a unified government, that I would unite all the people of this planet and bring security to the entire world. I promised that I would rescue everyone from hunger and panic, that I would enable everyone to enjoy a normal life. Thus, the new alliance government replaced the old alliance and established the alliance army. The Rage Owl Star people's own army fought on all fronts, unifying the entire planet. All the people of Rage Owl Star were once again united without any barriers, fighting for a common goal, no longer divided by power, ethnicity, or tribal interests. The vast majority of you have never heard that declaration. But that does not matter, for I, and the alliance I have built, have over the past 2.5 years, step by step, turned these promises into reality, into something that is right before everyone's eyes. Listening to the words coming from the radio, a tavern in Silver Sand City, the capital of the peninsula provincial capital, was filled with cheers and jubilation. These people were all soldiers of the alliance. After the hostilities on the western front ended, the main force had withdrawn to the east, but not without leaving some behind in the west. The fighting had just ceased, and local governance had been transferred to the newly established local governments, ending military control. Nevertheless, it still required the continued presence of the army brothers to suppress the area. However, the situation in the 3 western provinces was somewhat better compared to the eastern provinces at the time of their initial recovery. With Blackbird Heavy Industries finished, this place was a blank slate. When the alliance liberated vast tracts of land and cleared them of Blackbird Heavy Industries, rebuilding order was not a difficult task. As a result, the alliance soldiers stationed in the west were generally in a stable frame of mind. They hardly encountered any serious incidents, and the troops were even able to allow soldiers to leave their posts and go to the city for a break. The city was also relatively welcoming to the arrival of the alliance soldiers. The discipline of the alliance soldiers was very strict. When they came out to shop, drink, and dine, they paid what they owed. The stipends in the hands of the soldiers were worth solid alliance currency and quite reliable. Although the residents of Silver Sand City, who had just become Union citizens, also had their ranks set, most were only at the E5 level and did not receive much stipend, they were certainly happy to earn a bit more. The military command had already notified that today there would be a speech by the governor. Those on duty naturally listened to the radio at the military base. But for those who were on leave and having fun in the city, they had to find a place to listen. No one wanted to miss it. They found a tavern and, after calling friends together, more than half the tavern was filled with off-duty Alliance soldiers, a total of 60 or 70 at least. At their request, the tavern owner changed from playing music to the news channel. To be honest, the proprietor was not too keen on it. As the governor began his speech, boasting about how I have turned promises into reality, he just glanced at the soldiers cheering wildly. He didn't dare to speak loudly but muttered under his breath. Those high and mighty lords spout nonsense, and you, a bunch of cannon fodder sold out, have been brainwashed into fools, cheering for what? Although he spoke very quietly, he was still overheard by a soldier standing nearby. The man turned around, glaring fiercely at him. "Old man, what did you say?" The tavern owner was startled, stammering but afraid to speak again. Getting beaten up was one thing, but what he feared most was his place getting smashed by this troop of soldiers. Seeing the owner refusing to speak, the soldier became even more irritated. "We followed the governor's leadership and rescued you from those steel beasts. And you talk like this behind our backs? Hey!" He stood up bristling with the smell of alcohol, closing in on the owner. Frightened, the owner drew back, feeling doomed, as he knew a beating was inevitable. At that moment, another tall figure stepped in front of that soldier. It was a bald strong man with several scars on his face, but his expression was unexpectedly calm. He first advised his comrade, saying, "Don't get angry, don't get angry. This guy's mouth is asking for a beating. Demetrio, your old unit was completely wiped out, and now you're getting talked to like this. Don't you want to teach them a lesson? If you won't, I will. I'll take responsibility for any disciplinary issues." "It's not a disciplinary issue, it's about not tarnishing the governor's reputation," Demetrio said. "Humph." The man was clearly still angry, but after hearing these words, he miraculously held back his temper. After calming the person down, Demetrio turned around, faced the bar owner, and said earnestly, "Mr. Owner, I hope you apologize for your remarks just now." The owner was about to apologize immediately, showing a very quick submission. But before he could speak, Demetrio stopped him. "No need now. I don't want your apology to be out of fear, out of terror. First, listen. After listening to the governor's speech, then you decide whether or not to apologize. I won't force you." The owner could only stand anxiously to the side, trying hard to take in the information from the broadcast. He could no longer afford to regret his loose tongue. He had to listen carefully to see if he could find a way to apologize later without getting a beating. The broadcast continued. "We have resisted the resurgence of the cult, we have nipped the disaster of the green-skinned aliens in the bud, and our soldiers have gone into space and thwarted an attack by a green-skinned space fleet. In the Green Valley region, we carved out a large safe area in the north, essentially eliminating the threat of aberrant beasts in the Viking Valley zone. We eradicated the cult in the Green Valley region, and the Alliance army chased the demons back to their homeland. In the eastern 3 provinces, we have swept away the stubborn remnants of the old power. In the North Territory, we have completely exterminated the threat of the primordial rage owl sect to the world, allowing Polar Industrial Group to join the alliance. In the West, we have just completely wiped out Blackbird Heavy Industries. We have ended the fear that 13 million people on the western edge of the continent had to face at all times. They no longer have to worry that they, or their family members, or friends, could be singled out to be sent into Blackbird City, never to be heard from again." Just hearing this much, the heart of the owner of the bar in Silver Sand City was somewhat shaken. In the past, Blackbird Heavy Industries had absolute control over this land, especially towards the end. They continually forced people to move to Blackbird City, purportedly to lead a better life. At first, everyone believed it, but as time went on, although people outside did not know what was happening inside, they stopped receiving any news from friends and relatives who had gone in. Gradually, people began to question this, but anyone who dared to publicly question it would often be taken away very quickly. The bar owner's son and daughter were taken away like that. He had always been someone who didn't believe in conspiracy theories, maybe because he didn't dare to, still holding on to a sliver of hope. But the arrival of the Alliance completely shattered his illusions. He didn't want his illusions to be shattered, he preferred to still believe that his son and daughter were alive, he preferred to believe it was just a war of the rulers biting each other. This should have been posted with the next chapter, but I haven't finished writing it, so I'll post this part first. Another chapter is coming, I'll try to have it by 3 am, so you all can read it tomorrow. Don't stay up late. Chapter 525. What was Blackbird Heavy Industries' slogan again? Oh, right. Embrace the glorious evolution. The bar owner would rather believe that his son and daughter, chosen by Blackbird, really had better development opportunities than to think, as the Alliance claimed, that they were taken to have their brains cut open and turned into robots devoid of self-awareness. But he found it increasingly difficult to deceive himself. If it were only the Alliance's statement, he could dismiss it as false propaganda from a political rival. However, with some survivors returning and the spread of civilian news, these pieces of information could verify what the Alliance had said. At that moment, the words spoken by Mr. Gu were not what truly convinced him, but they were the last straw that broke the camel's back. He struggled to open his mouth. This time, it wasn't because of the soldiers in front of him, coercing him with force into making an apology. Instead, he had come to a realization from the bottom of his heart. Yet, in front of him, Demetrios still didn't let him speak. He made a shush gesture, signaling the bar owner to keep listening. The man had no choice but to hold back. Meanwhile, Gu Hang's voice continued in the broadcast. After narrating the achievements of the Alliance government since its establishment, the southern and northern campaigns, the unification of the globe, and the liberation of the entire world, he began to talk about the aftermath. We established a job ranking system that benefits the whole world, from basic subsistence guarantees to basic medical care, from educational assurance to employment security, from basic welfare to a salary system determined by job rank, from government-led infrastructure construction and large factory production to policies encouraging the public to start their own businesses. The Alliance is committed to ensuring that every individual has a place within its system. Everyone can live with dignity and have the opportunity to achieve a better and higher standard of living and realize their self-worth through their own efforts. The channels for advancement are always open to everyone. Hearing this, the bar owner was even more convinced. If it was all just boasting, that would be one thing, but many of these things had even been verified in his own life. Most people he knew, as long as they were physically able and capable of working, were at least ranked as E5. According to the E5 level's benefits and allowances, this was at least a secure and contented living. For those with jobs, ranking was based on their work, those without, the Alliance took responsibility for assigning and arranging work. As for himself, since he owned a bar that was doing quite well, he was even ranked as E7. Admittedly, he had lost the ownership of the bar, which had irritated him. But when it came down to it, the Alliance gave him more than he lost. His previously meager business income was just enough to break even and support his own livelihood. The Alliance's contribution had actually improved his life. Of course, the bar's business could get better in the future. But even though he lost profits, his accelerated rank promotion from running the bar could make up for it. All things considered, he wasn't at a loss. Were there any downsides? There were. For example, forced labor. The Alliance indeed did not support idleness. Even if temporarily out of work, you were expected to sweep the streets or dig foundations at construction sites if assigned. But even for the black hat bar owners like him, it was difficult to criticize the Alliance on this point. If people want to live well, they should work. Where is there such a good thing as being ranked and then lying at home living off welfare? The Alliance, or rather the entire society of Rage Owl Star, was not yet wealthy to that extent. You don't want this job? Okay, the Alliance has never restricted anyone from seeking any employment. Assigned to sweep the streets, you're free anytime to become a factory worker or a store clerk. If you're not satisfied and want a better future, going back to school is also an option. Adult education can be deferred in payment, and if you have good grades, the tuition can be waived. From this perspective, every word spoken by the governor is true, a reality witnessed by the residents under the rule of the Alliance. But that's not enough. At least, in the mouth of Governor Gu, it's not enough. These are our achievements, but we will never pause for a moment on the journey towards the happiness and welfare of all the people of the Alliance. On behalf of the Alliance government, I solemnly promise to every citizen of the Alliance. We will persevere in prioritizing economic development and the welfare of the people as the government's primary concern. We will build more factories, producing more products and food. We will build a stronger military to protect the fruits of our hard work. We will deepen reforms of the Alliance's systems, invigorating economic development. We will continue to promote anti-corruption policies and advocate for an efficient government, leaving no hiding place for the parasites. We will create more valuable jobs, to accommodate more high-ranking positions, allowing more willing and intelligent Union citizens to climb the ranks faster, and to receive better treatment. This is the solemn promise I, and the Alliance government, make to all the residents of the Alliance. The broadcast speech of Governor Gu has come to an end. As the words solemn promise fell silent, the little tavern in Silver Sand City became noisy and boisterous. The loyal soldiers of the Alliance, their cheering and joyful voices, hadn't ceased from the start of the governor's speech, and now they had become even louder. Now, the soldiers, whose passions had been ignited, laughed, boasted to each other, competed in drinking, and no longer paid attention to the small interlude that had just occurred. Just like the governor said, we have an infinitely vast cause to work on, who has time to fuss over such trivial matters? And the tavern owner had become a bit dumbfounded. He looked around nervously and saw Demetrio. He opened his mouth and said, I want to apologize to you. Demetrio smiled and waved his hand. Judging by your look, I roughly understand your thoughts. You should indeed apologize, but not today. Everyone is in high spirits, no one wants to dwell or listen to you talk about the upsetting incident just now. He paused, and the sergeant continued, actually, you've never needed to apologize to us, your apology should be to Mr. Gu. But Mr. Gu is even more magnanimous than us. Work well, make sure the tavern has more tables, a wider variety of drinks, tastier food. Endeavor to make this tavern better and better, that's the best apology you can offer. The tavern owner took a deep breath and said, I understand. Then, he called out loudly to the noisy soldiers, drinks are on the house today. Don't worry about the loss, I still have plenty of loss margins. Drink up everyone. The soldiers laughed and cheered, whistles blowing loudly, no longer dwelling on what had happened before. Chapter 526. In the Green Valley region, a group of investigators had just returned from hunting, investigating clues. They too had heard the governor's speech on the broadcast. A young judge, hesitating, opened his mouth and said, this team leader of ours, did he really come back to investigate clues? Why did he dump us here and disregard us, running off to give some global speech? It seems to me he doesn't take the investigation team's work seriously, he just wanted to come back to be the governor. His question prompted a burst of light laughter from the others in the investigation team. He was confused and didn't know what was so funny about what he had said. The others, too lazy to explain, were also strangers to one another. There were those from the national religion, the sect of mechanics, the Psychic Cultivators Association, the legal department. Formed into a temporary team, they didn't want to engage with this clueless youth in any conversation out of turn. Only an old judge from the tribunal, like him, helplessly stopped the young man who was about to speak again, pulling him aside and started muttering in a low voice. Why blurt out such blunt truths? If you can see it, don't spout nonsense, otherwise, everyone will just laugh at you. Why? Can't even talk now. So, Mr. Gu, the team leader, is coming back to be the governor, and what are we doing here on Rage Owl Star? Investigating clues. What have you investigated these past few days? He recalled that each day was spent finding different delicious things to eat. The agricultural produce here, grains, meat, and the like, were all natural. Such natural foods were a rarity in the Empire, especially in larger, heavily populated planets like Nest Capital. Naturally bred livestock and fresh vegetables and fruits, where could they be compared with mass-produced synthetic meats, artificial fibers, and vitamins in terms of cost efficiency? While the high-ranking elites and wealthy tycoons certainly didn't need to worry, these investigators were not the top figures of their respective forces, they were comfortably middle class, hardly rich. So, naturally, they hardly got to eat such natural foods. As for the so-called investigation activities, he previously thought they were indeed investigative, but looking back now, it was merely hunting trips to relieve boredom. Come here, be treated to good food and drink, and you might as well enjoy yourself as if you were on a holiday. Still talking about investigating? The outbreak of the demonic disaster here was controlled as soon as it started, and it's been a year and a half, what else is there to find? This, the young man found it hard to accept. If you can't stand it, go investigate yourself, you can also report it when you get back. But let me tell you, don't make trouble for yourself. If you report it, nothing will change. This is tacitly approved by the higher-ups, even the result of some exchange of interests. With that, the veteran judge fell silent. Upon returning, a familiar face, laughing, said, "Why bother with so much? A young man will learn after running into a few walls. Isn't it about not spoiling everyone's fun?" On Rage Owl Star, not only the investigation group had listened to the entirety of Governor Gu's speech. There were also over 250,000 interstellar immigrants. Of those, 210,000 had come with Governor Gu during his return aboard the Corolla 3, the remaining 40,000 had been brought over from Hagian Star while the Gu commercial firm's ships were transporting supplies for the stationed Alliance army. Throughout Governor Gu's speech, he talked about the Alliance, the development of Rage Owl Star, and barely mentioned these immigrants. However, the immigrants were still incredibly excited after hearing the governor's words, filled with hopeful anticipation. They felt the power and determination of the Alliance as the governing body of this planet through the past achievements outlined by Governor Gu. And in the future painted by the governor, they saw a better life beckoning to them. The Alliance indeed did not specifically mention what would happen to these people, but it was actually completely unnecessary. Each of them, upon arriving at Rage Owl Star, was assigned a corresponding rank. Generally, they were all at the E4 level, which failed to reach the E5 level of formal citizenship in the Alliance, meaning their rights as citizens were not complete, and their welfare benefits were also substandard. But, whether it's the people from Corolla 3 or those from Hagian Star, there generally wasn't any dissatisfaction. E4 was enough. After all, the welfare and allowances received per capita amounted to 0.3 tax currency a year. Wasn't that enough? When Corolla 3 treated people like livestock, having per capita expenses amounting to 0.1 was already considered generous by the overlords. The consumption of food and industrial products had tripled at once. What did they have to be unsatisfied about? Moreover, a bright path lay before them. Being granted the E4 rank was a start. The Alliance had allocated them corresponding work or educational opportunities, under fairly relaxed conditions, that merely required working hard for 1 year. Advancing to the E5 rank and gaining full citizenship rights as well as improving their own treatment was a simple matter. Mr. Gu, the governor, spoke sentence after sentence about the Alliance, but every sentence was also about them. The vast majority of them had already shed the fear of being far from their homeland that they had had while migrating on the starship. Let the miserable slum areas of Nest Capital be damned. We are now part of the Alliance. Mandoy Lucas was one of those who had quickly transformed their sense of identity. And unlike most of her compatriots, although she came from the lower strata, she had made a name for herself through various strokes of fate. At the age of 40, she ended up in the upper district, and relying on her own studies, became a Nest Capital urban planner. It sounded good, but in reality, she was just another worker. Due to her poor background, her professional ceiling was limited, and many of her ideas and designs were not valued. She had so many plans that, if realized, could greatly improve the living conditions and quality of life for the residents of the bottom city area, but those designs were always confined to the bottom of a box. If she completely abandoned her past, perhaps she could live decently. But she just couldn't forget the lower city area of Pheno City. The environment there was perilous, it was rife with bad people, gangs ran rampant, cults proliferated, honest people lived in miserable conditions, yet would become oppressors given the chance. The place was almost wholly rotten. But she never thought the people there were to blame. It was the environment of despair that was the root of all evils. When the plague broke out, she was back home conducting surveys, working on a new round of designs. Caught in the disaster, she, like many refugees, was rescued by the military from Rage Owl Star, saved her life, and then was hazily sent aboard the starship bound for Rage Owl Star. After listening to Mr. Gu's broadcast speech, she was deeply moved. This was a kind of statement she had never heard on Corolla 3. The nobles there didn't even bother to pretend to care for their subjects. A glimmer of hope arose in her. Perhaps her abilities could be put to use on another planet. With a nervous heart, she found the team leader of the textile factory job she had been assigned to, revealed her capabilities, and hoped to meet the people higher up. She thought she would face a lot of difficulties, as it was very common on Corolla 3. She had even prepared many arguments to enhance her credibility. But there were none. She made her way up and met Mr. Parter, the mayor of Wuxing City. Chapter 527. This broadcast speech to the entire alliance was certainly not a whim of Gu Hang's. He had at least 3 layers of purpose in this matter. First and foremost, as the Union had just completed the unification of the whole planet, he needed to address all citizens in his capacity as a ruler and proclaim the legitimacy of the alliance. This would help boost the confidence of the people. Secondly, he also had to use this means to convey his political ideology to the officials of the alliance government. Thirdly, he had been away from his center of power for half a year and needed to make his voice heard in public in order to strengthen his own prestige. Regarding the second and third points, they couldn't be solved with just one speech. Or rather, whether it was the implementation of ideals or the maintenance of personal authority, neither could be resolved once and for all in a short period or by a single action. This required his long-term and continuous embodiment. In the following period, Gu Heng's schedule became incredibly busy. He hardly stayed in Revival City for a long time and was flying all over the alliance. Today he would meet with a regional governor, tomorrow an important mayor, and the next day he would visit a military garrison to offer comfort to soldiers. After a round of such visits, upon returning to Revival City, Gu Heng would then meet with important members from various departments of the central government. Indeed, during his visit with the mayor of Wuxing City, Patel, he heard about a middle-aged female worker who had been assigned to an ordinary factory in Wuxing City but was in fact a city planner from Karolia 3. Although she was not the main architect of the whole city, her experience in urban planning for such a 10 billion people metropolis like Pheno City, and even her rare personal insights, made her a sought-after talent. In just over a month, by observing around Wuxing City, she identified several unreasonable aspects in the urban construction planning. By redesigning the road network and urban development, simple and localized changes significantly improved logistics efficiency and the smoothness of city resource traffic at certain nodes. The roads for transporting raw materials and outputting products finally stopped conflicting with each other, resolving the chronic problem of frequent congestion in that area. Later, she even came up with a complete set of three-dimensional construction plans, as well as a vision for the integration of Revival City and Wuxing City, based on some planning documents of the alliance government. All these things astonished Patel, making him feel as if he had stumbled upon a treasure, leading him to bypass normal channels for talented individuals, hoping to greatly elevate the position of the lady named Mandoya Lucas. He even made a special mention of this during his visit to the governor. Gu Heng was also very pleased. If she could handle urban planning in a metropolis of 10 billion people, let alone in Wuxing City, which currently has only millions of inhabitants. Although Wuxing City was planned as one of the most important industrial centers of the alliance from the very beginning, it had its limitations in terms of scale and the capabilities and vision of the planners, which meant some things were not perfect. With the addition of such a talented individual, he was indeed eager to have a good chat with Ms. Lucas. Unfortunately, he truly did not have the time. At least not for now, as he was about to lead some members of the investigative team back to Karolia 3 to report. After this return trip, he had other matters to attend to. He would have to wait for the next opportunity with regret. Nothing significant happened during Gu Heng's trip to Karolia 3. He no longer had ships from the Gu commercial firm at his disposal, but the alliance had produced a starship capable of interstellar travel, equipped with weapons and shield systems. The weapons system was barely adequate. Against some destitute interstellar pirates, it could still fight, but if the enemy was slightly larger in scale, there would be big trouble. However, the route from Rage Owl Star to Karolia 3 was not considered dangerous. Aside from the greenskin plundering fleet that suddenly appeared last time, which may well have been drawn by the system, there hadn't been much news of interstellar pirates. Interstellar pirates, risking their lives to acquire ships capable of cosmic travel, would of course want to make big money. The few shipping lanes around Rage Owl Star were not bustling with activity and were even as poor as ghosts, so pirates were too lazy to come there. In short, even traveling on a starship, the chance of an incident was very low. However, the starship was small, with a crew of only about 500 people. It could not transport a large amount of materials and was not convenient for bringing back items from Karolia 3. On this trip to Karolia 3, Gu Heng took some of the investigative team members with him and exchanged a few. During the period, a little kid even ran to tattle on him, but the final result of that, of course, sank like a stone in the sea. He didn't pay it any mind. Some representatives of the investors had also returned. Gu Heng didn't know what they would specifically tell their bosses, but at least from the feedback obtained from the Alliance Foreign Affairs Department this also brought back some positive results. Chapter 528. Gu Heng stayed on Karolia 3 for 2 days. On the first day, he mingled with the investigation team, wrote reports, drank tea and had chats with Grand Mage Zhang Guang'an and the like. On the second day, he met with a few investors and signed several investment agreements regarding the Rage Owl Star port. The investments were generally not large, those able to make a decision so swiftly were honestly not the big spenders. Their gestures were more like backing Gu Heng the individual. The common investment amounts were only around 100,000 tax currency, at most 200,000. Altogether, the investors contributed roughly 700,000 tax currency. This, of course, was far from enough for building a large-scale starport, and Rage Owl Star needed much more than this 700,000 tax currency. Despite this, Gu Heng accepted all offers without exception. Why refuse money? He included it all as shares in the starport, to be distributed as dividends accordingly. Moreover, Gu Heng didn't use this batch of money for himself. Instead, he immediately signed another agreement with the Gu commercial firm. Along with some previous savings from the alliance and 1 million tax currency contributed by his mother, this money became the investment from the Gu commercial firm into the Rage Owl starport. In total, this amounted to 2 million tax currency. The Gu commercial firm then began to leverage its connections, reserving the schedule for a construction starship from a sect of mechanics Foundry World 2 star sectors away. They would arrive at Rage Owl Star in 1 year and begin construction. In another year, the Rage Owl starport would be built up to a scale capable of docking large vessels and supporting a substantial population and throughputs of material goods. All in all, including the costs of hiring labor, materials, and in-flight industrial components, the total cost of Rage Owl starport was projected to be around 500 million tax currency. Even though much of the materials and groundwork would be extracted, smelted, and produced by the Alliance themselves, and although the Alliance's own space construction machinery would undertake a significant portion of the work, the actual cash or equivalent material costs incurred would still be around 200 million tax currency. This was a massive investment, exceeding the current financial capacity of Rage Owl Star. Miss Wang Qi had expressed her concerns to Gu Heng, but he didn't listen. It was indeed a bit extreme, but he believed it was a necessary investment. Otherwise, relying solely on the slow construction by the Alliance itself, it would take 5 to 10 years to develop the starport to the same scale. The losses incurred in that period would not just be time spent on starport construction but also the prime opportunity for the development of Rage Owl Star. He would rather spend 200 million to seize this opportunity. As for how to raise this money, Gu Heng wasn't too worried. A down payment of 2 million had been spent, and the construction schedule for the starship was set, which itself reflected Gu Heng's determination. This resolve could directly resonate with other investors. Gu Heng was no swindler. Firstly, he had a planet vouching for him, secondly, the Gu commercial firm stood behind him, and thirdly, he had recently become a notable figure in the Tianma Star sector's political sphere. He believed he could attract a considerable number of investors. For many wealthy individuals, investing in the construction of a starport on a planet with promising development potential was quite valuable. Gu Heng aimed to raise 50 million tax currency when the sect of mechanics construction ship arrived in 1 year and then exceed 150 million within 2 years. This would suffice to cover the costs for these 2 phases of the project. What if he couldn't raise enough funds? Then the Gu commercial firm would cover the shortfall. The Gu commercial firm was affluent. Although the money didn't all belong to Gu Heng, or even entirely to the Gu family, it didn't matter. Gu Heng was the family head, and his mother was the actual controller. They could fully use the Gu commercial firm's name to invest in the Rage Owl starport. Whatever the shortfall, they would cover it with shares, converting it into fixed assets for the Gu commercial firm. Of course, this would definitely cause discontent within the firm and attract opposition. After all, the firm had always emphasized, aside from investing in starships, not partaking in other heavy assets investments unless necessary, and investing in a starport clearly broke this tradition. But on one hand, Gu Heng believed his mother could resolve these issues. On the other hand, even if it caused some disruption, in comparison to the construction of Rage Owl Star, it was an acceptable trade-off. If it really had a significant impact on the family business, his mother would assess it and wouldn't agree thoughtlessly. After signing that pile of agreements on the investment and construction of the starport, Gu Heng hurriedly boarded a shuttle and returned to Rage Owl Star. Upon his return, he continued his busy life traveling around the planet for a while, finally making a complete tour of all the important regions of the world and meeting all the key figures in the Alliance. Once he finally had some free time, Gu Heng began to plan how to spend the over 50,000 favor points he had on hand. Unquestionably, the spending of favor points was the greatest tool in enhancing the strength of the Alliance. Drawing for technology, of course, was a major part of it. However, before he started drawing, Gu Heng set aside a portion of favor points for other purposes. He resolved the other matters first, and whatever favor points remained, he would use for the drawing. And what were these so-called other matters? Broadly, they were in three areas: construction, talent, and military. Let's start with construction. He exchanged for 13 civilian factories and 27 military factories, costing a total of 4,000 favor points, all of which he allocated to the various factories in Wuxing City. The 40 factory exchange items essentially covered the entire area of Wuxing City. The number of factories in Wuxing City, of course, wasn't just limited to these. However, the exchange items for military factories and civilian factories had a covering effect. Smaller scale factories could cluster together and share an exchange item, all benefiting from the boost. Conversely, if the factory was too large, it might require multiple exchange items to cover it in order to truly enhance the factory's production efficiency. These 4,000 favor points and 40 factory exchange items, according to the description text in the construction interface, basically ensured that the entire Wuxing City area's production capabilities were upgraded by a moderate extent. In the past, Gu Heng had also exchanged factory options and allocated them to some military factories. After a detailed inquiry and comparative study, he could roughly estimate that this so-called moderate extent of enhancement was about 15%. This was quite impressive. It meant that without changes in worker skill, quantity, technology, or management structures, production capacity increased by 15%, which was certainly a very good effect. Specifically, in Wuxing City, the annual output had already reached 10 million tax currency. A 15% increase in production capacity represented an additional output of 3 million tax currency worth of industrial products each year, most of which were military or heavy industrial products. Why 3 million? Because the factories that Gu Heng boosted, of course, weren't generously chosen. Some low-value ones, such as bullet production lines and textile factories, weren't really necessary. Instead, lines like the Lion Tank, armored vehicles, Wind Falcon, and steel making, these larger scale, higher value added. A 15% increase in their production capacity brought about a far greater increase in output value than a uniform enhancement. And remember, this was every year, not a one-off deal. Extend the timeline, and those growth rates could be enjoyed long-term. Besides that, Gu Heng also strengthened the alliance's education system. He could see in the construction interface that the three academies he had previously established, the Loyal Air Academy, Comprehensive Academy, and Technical Academy, all had advanced upgrade options available. The price for each was 500 favor points. Gu Heng never begrudged investments in education. Increasing the quality of the populace was of significant importance to the construction of the alliance. Besides, he now had an abundance of resources, and a total investment of 1,500 favor points was entirely affordable. After completing these enhancements and upgrades, Gu Heng also saw a new building listed in the construction menu. Mage Academy. Chapter 529. Mage Academy. Once you have built an academy dedicated to teaching control of spiritual energy and specific psychic spells, and have set it into operation, you may redeem this option to assign to the designated academy. It slightly increases student learning efficiency and faintly increases the chance of loyal talents becoming available for activation. New troop type available for training, Psychic. Exchange value, 5,000 favors. Training cost, 100 favors/person. The effects of this Mage Academy are similar to the other three, except that the bonuses for training general talents, technical talents, and loyalists are applied to the training of psychics instead. It's just that the price has soared straight up compared to when those other academies were first established. But Gu Heng still had no doubts and clicked to exchange. The main reason was that the training of the psychics was too enticing. It was particularly fitting for his current situation. The training of psychics, even with the system, still requires the trainees to have a talent for spiritual energy. This is quite normal, just as when Gu Heng was cultivating new blood for the Phoenix Battle Group, he had to train them from the age of teens, step by step from T5 to T1. During this process, many people could only advance to T3 or T4 level and could not train further, which meant that this level represented the person's highest potential. And the proportion of people with the talent for psychics in the population might even be lower than those with the potential to reach T1 level. However, compared to training T1 level warriors and cultivating new star warriors, training psychics is much simpler. First of all, there's no upfront investment. To train a T1 warrior, one must practice all the way up. Before then, no one knows whether a still growing youngster has this potential, one only knows after beginning the training. Therefore, training a T1 warrior requires 100 favors, exchanging a seed costs 100 favors, but in actuality, Gu Hang has to spend 1,000 or 2 points of favor for a round of selection to eventually find 2 or 3 suitable candidates. Of course, the extra expenses were not without value, they were thrown into the 10th Brigade to become special forces. Equipped with exoskeleton armor and more elite weapons, they also formed a not insignificant force. When training psychics, there is no such worry. One glance at the training interface to see if someone is trainable, and if not, just drop it, there's no cost up front. Moreover, training for psychics is very suited for Gu Hang. Where does human talent for spiritual energy come from? Basically, it is the sensitivity of the human spirit to the source of spiritual energy, the subspace. Those with higher sensitivity naturally possess talent. In the past, this was a disaster. Those with a talent for spiritual energy, even those so high they naturally possessed certain supernatural powers without training, could constantly hear whispers from subspace, endure massive mental pressure, and go mad. Moreover, they themselves would be targeted by malevolent entities within subspace as conduits to the real world. A person wielding uncontrollable power, prone to madness, and likely to attract demons, obviously, this was a source of disaster. In many places, there was a tradition of witch hunting to proactively eliminate these dangers, resulting in customs and religious edicts. In fact, under the earlier environmental conditions of the entire empire, psychics were likewise subject to stringent control, with many individuals with talents for spiritual energy being executed directly. Not until the Divine Emperor ascended and carved out a space in subspace to establish the spirit network. Wild psychics without control are still dangerous. They possess talents but are unaware, untaught, unsupervised, and thus very likely to fall into madness under the whispers of subspace, lose their minds, go out of control, or even become beacons for demon invasions of the real world. But trained psychics can direct their sensitivity to spiritual energy to the spirit network built by the Divine Emperor, allowing them to use spiritual energy safely. They will not be targeted by malevolent entities within subspace, and the likelihood of plunging into madness and losing control of their power is greatly reduced. This has made psychics a truly exploitable part of humanity. At the same time, it has established the importance of the Psychic Cultivators Association. They are not only responsible for cultivating psychics, star speakers, navigators, but they also collect wild psychics. Those who can still be saved are trained into legitimate, legal psychics, those already mad or corrupted by demons beyond saving are dealt with. In such an environment, Gu Hang coincidentally has two things that tie in nicely with it. Firstly, he obtained authorization from Zhang Guangen, a big shot at the Psychic Cultivators Association, to establish a branch of the Psychic Cultivators Association on Rage Owl Star. This was something he needed to do, and it would allow him to get a foothold into the upper echelons of the Empire's power structure through the Psychic Cultivators Association. Secondly, Gu Hang just happened to control a piece of the subspace divine kingdom. The essence of a psychic fundamentally lies in their sensitivity to subspace, which, logically, cannot be taught as it's innate. But with Gu Hang, it's not the case. Unless they are so-called untouchables, completely subspace insulators, Gu Hang can turn anyone with even a slight talent for spiritual energy, which actually most humans have, into psychics. Chapter 530. Even those with the most stubborn physiques, when placed inside the divine realm for 10 days to half a month and thoroughly bathed in subspace's blessing from head to toe, would suddenly become sensitive to spiritual energy. Upon returning and coordinating with the system to undergo a training for a specific type of soldier, they were certain to become spiritual energy users. Of course, there was no need to go to such extremes. Gu Hang wasn't aiming to create a society of all spiritual energy users. The Rage Owl Star, due to the presence of the Storm God Kingdom, naturally had a thinner veil to subspace compared to other planets, which was why resources such as the spiritualized gas field existed. Even more so, Gu Hang suspected that that cult, along with the Iron Men Rebellion, had much to do with the planet's thinner veil of reality. In such an environment, the likelihood of Rage Owl Star people manifesting as spiritual energy users was inherently higher. Not to mention, now that Gu Hang had seized control of the Storm God Kingdom, it had an extensive yet benign influence over the entire planet, subtly resulting in a considerable number of individuals with innate spiritual energy talent. In fact, the primordial Wrath Owl sect was a case in point. While it was rare in other places to find high-grade spiritual energy users, there were a plethora of evil sorcerers among them. Of course, there were differences between the two. After all, spiritual energy users belonged to the category of scholars, mages, and were people with innate talent who became such through training. Whereas the so-called evil sorcerers received their powers directly from the evil god, somewhat akin to Gu Heng's previous idea of stuffing a person into the divine realm for a baptism, which greatly reduced the requirement for talent. Setting that matter aside for the moment, the benefits Gu Heng could reap from almost whimsically cultivating spiritual energy users were obvious. Firstly, the number and quality of spiritual energy users collectively determined the status of the Rage Owl Sex Psychic Cultivators Association within the entire system of such associations. It was the grade of the high-level power field entry ticket Gu Heng had previously contemplated. Moreover, the Psychic Cultivators Association could request funding from the Empire, with the allocated amount directly depending on the size of the association. Furthermore, having a multitude of trained spiritual energy users was inherently of great value. The combat effectiveness of spiritual energy users was formidable. At lower grades, they might not be as reliable as a laser gun, but who said that spiritual energy users couldn't also carry guns? Moreover, they had a higher potential for development. When they reached C grade, the level of ability Gu Heng himself held at 2 or 3, they could influence the outcome of a company-level battle. They also had strong functional capabilities in scouting, interrogation, infiltration, special operations, all of which were excellent supplements to regular elite forces. Furthermore, one shouldn't fixate on mere combat. Once star speakers were trained, they could construct the Star Language Tower, which was a potent export product. Star navigators were indispensable for interstellar travel. After training these individuals, it was beneficial whether Rage Owl Star employed them itself or sent them out to work for others and earn wages. Especially in terms of sending them out to earn wages, this wasn't Gu Heng being ruthless, but rather, it was standard procedure under the Psychic Cultivators Association system. The Navy, different planets, the Empire Commerce Guild, the Sect of Mechanics, the national religion, even the Starfighter battle group, as long as there were interstellar travel and communication needs, they had to go to the Psychic Cultivators Association for personnel. When these people were sent out, they had to be paid, and a portion of that money would go to the association that trained them. Whether it was a regular cut or a lump sum buyout fee for their training, fostering one was hugely profitable. And the best part was, even though spiritual energy users were working for others, they were still under the jurisdiction of their respective associations, which could recall them if necessary, compensating some money. If the contract ended, they could choose not to renew it. Being a top-tier organization with the potential to enter the Imperial Supreme Council, the Psychic Cultivators Association didn't have the massive scale of the Sect of Mechanics or the national religion, but still had its own confidence. Gu Heng had quite the motivation to cultivate spiritual energy users. Construction of the Mage Academy had already begun site selection. The Minister of Education had even inquired about the name of the academy. Hogwarts almost slipped off Gu Heng's tongue, but in the end, he restrained himself. He decided to stick to being more straightforward. Let's call it the Storm Mage Academy, and the future Mage Corps will bear the same name. In terms of construction, Gu Heng spent a total of 11,500 points of grace. He still had over 40,000. The second major expenditure was on talent. In the Alliance, Gu Heng had activated people like Ozania, Yan Fangxiu, Perbuff, Tadeus, Wu Jiarong, and others using the hero system. He had already appreciated the benefits of activating heroes. No matter what their initial aptitude was, after becoming heroes, not only did their abilities greatly improve on the spot, but they also gained a high potential for growth. Not only could levels be raised through experience in handling affairs, enhancing abilities, but also that so-called rarity could grow, though it was much harder and seemed to require certain key opportunities. No matter how you looked at it, these early activated heroes had now grown to become pivotal figures in various fields within the Alliance. Therefore, he had to continue without let-up. In the past, when the Alliance had only a few thousand or at most several million people, there were already several candidates who could be activated. Now, with a total population of 45 million in the Alliance, even the number of non-military government staff had reached nearly 130,000. Naturally, the number of activatable heroes had increased significantly. So far, Gu Heng could now see more than 500 people who could be activated as heroes in his talent interface. This was a significant number. Gu Heng himself was internally mocking, what kind of heroes are these? Is it wholesale or what? However, from another concept, it could be understood as people with the potential to become heroes. Most of them were of the most common N grade. Those who reached the higher R grade were fewer than 20, there was only one SR grade. Gu Heng planned to activate all of them, which would cost just over 6,000 in blessings. Among them, some already held important positions, others were still unknown. For the former, there was nothing to say, and Gu Heng wouldn't give them any special treatment. They would stand out in their lives and work within the alliance system after their hero attributes were activated and their abilities significantly enhanced. As for the latter, Gu Heng planned to elevate them to higher positions. There were corresponding positions within the alliance system to arrange for talents in government and business. They wouldn't be too high, but at least they would be a position where they could utilize their abilities to a certain extent, like a deputy director of an office, an assistant to a project, a deputy manager of a factory. In the military, those with command talent would be given positions around deputy company level or company leader level. Single combat types would be transferred to the 10th Brigade. In these positions, Gu Heng believed that the vast majority of them would excel. Of course, before that, they would have to undergo special training. Gu Heng made a list of these 500 and some people and handed it over to the alliance government. Officials from the Ministry of Education would then review their records according to the list, mainly checking for any learning experience at Loyal Air Academy. As for the 20 at R grade and the 1 at SR grade, Gu Heng also specially noted them. They would not be rushed, their treatment would be the same as everyone else's. However, in the higher echelons of the alliance, the names of these few individuals were specially marked, and they would receive more attention. Regarding the cultivation of such a large group of people, Gu Heng coined a name, called the Cradle Project. He hoped that from this cradle would emerge a batch of true heroes. Chapter 531. The Storm Mage Corps and the Cradle Plan, these were the two central cores of Gu Heng's subsequent efforts in talent training. The former focused on cultivating extraordinary functional talents with spiritual energy practitioners at its core, constructing the path of the Psychic Cultivators Association, while the latter was an indispensable part of talent building throughout the full spectrum development of the alliance itself. In these two areas, Gu Heng was very willing to invest a substantial amount of grace points. So far, his total investment of grace points in architecture and talent has reached more than 17,000. He still had over 30,000 at his disposal. Next, it was time for military construction. Regarding military equipment, this did not require grace points but relied on the alliance's own productivity. However, personnel needed the training function provided by the soldier card panel for supplementation. First, it was about replenishing the existing troops. The Blackbird campaign, with both stages combined, resulted in a personnel loss of over 75,000 for the Alliance Army. The Rage Bear Legion's battles on Karolia III had also accumulated losses of 10,000 to date. Under the banner of glorious victory, the Alliance Army also paid the price with heaps of corpses. This number of losses was actually not small at all. Before the victory of the Blackbird campaign, the Alliance's total manpower pool without initiating a conscription order was just under 500,000, almost fully utilized. The active military personnel of the Alliance had exceeded 500,000. During the mid to late Blackbird campaign, the Alliance initiated a second-level conscription order, shifted production capacity to military industries, and expanded the scope of conscription to withstand the pressure. Now, the conscription order was cancelled after the war ended. However, after the victory, the Alliance gained control over the entire western part of the continent, with the West Desert Province and 3 other provinces, adding a population of 18 million to the Alliance. The strain on available manpower significantly eased. Gu Heng had no intention of massively expanding the army for the time being. He simply established 6 armored composite divisions numbered 60 to 65, organized and structured to match the current wind extinguishing brigades. At the same time, all the other existing composite camps were also restructured to this standard. Regarding the 1st Extinguishing Wind Brigade, which was always used as the model of innovation for the Alliance Army, it was further strengthened and reorganized. Firstly, all the composite camps increased their personnel and removed all motorized infantry companies, switching entirely to 4 armored infantry companies plus 2 tank companies, and likewise included engineer, logistics, communications, reconnaissance, anti-air, and other functional troops within. Such a company's strength grew from the original 800 and some to 1200, increasing by half and becoming nearly the size of an average battalion, with the density of technical equipment many times that of a conventional battalion. For the entire brigade, the main composite camps increased from 5 to 8, the original tank battalion also increased from 1 to 2. Artillery support companies for each battalion, along with the brigade's own artillery battalion, shifted from towed artillery to much more mobile self-propelled artillery. The brigade headquarters also included various functional troops. The brigade's total strength increased from 9,100 to 12,000, the number of tanks grew from 80 to 204, a 2.5-fold increase, while the number of armored vehicles soared from 200 to 900. In addition to the numerically dominant infantry fighting vehicles, there were also more of the Walker series including anti-aircraft and command vehicles. Directly under the brigade headquarters, there were 3 aviation formations, totaling 30 Wind Falcons. All soldiers were collectively trained from T5 level to T4 level by Gu Heng. The equipment of the frontline combat infantry would be completely switched from the G series of projectile rifles to the LR series of laser rifles or HS series of electromagnetic rifles. As a luxurious enhanced composite brigade, serving as a demonstration army, its construction period would be long, probably not a task that could be completed quickly. From the price alone, one could see the wind extinguishing brigade's cost would skyrocket from the original 90 grace points plus less than 600,000 in tax currency to 1320 grace points plus 1,800,000 in tax currency. The improvement in soldier quality and the significant increase in technical equipment density undoubtedly meant that the wind extinguishing brigade's combat strength would surge greatly. Although the number of people only increased by about 3,000, the combat strength likely increased many times over. However, Gu Heng was also not sure if the improved combat strength compared to the increased costs would mean that the cost effectiveness had actually improved. The construction cost had tripled, which was easy to explain, as the significant increase in equipment quantity directly bolstered combat capability. It was the extra 1,000+ grace points spent on improving troop quality that he wondered if they could truly enhance the combat power tenfold. Gu Heng was somewhat skeptical of this. But on the other hand, how could he know without trying? After all, it was only one brigade. The first extinguishing wind brigade, as a demonstration unit, was meant to undergo such experimental restructuring. The remaining issue would likely be for the wind extinguishing brigade to head to a certain battlefield and put their enhanced combat strength to the test, to see if it matched the exaggerated cost increase. But now on Rage Owl Star, there were no battles requiring their intervention. For regular domestic suppression tasks, there was little difference between the cheapest garrison division and the most expensive elite armored combined brigade. Chapter 532. But the Alliance now also has 2 battlefields that need manpower. They are Karolia 3 and Hajian Star. Gu Heng thought for a moment, then decided he could throw the entire wind extinguishing brigade onto Hajian Star. Lately, there had been fighting there. He would discuss the specifics later, as Gu Heng's attention was still on building up his forces. To establish 6 new brigades, upgrade another 9 composite brigades, and significantly strengthen the wind extinguishing brigade, a total increase of over 60,000 soldiers was needed. The additional military budget for equipment would require an increase of almost 6 million tax currency. The shortage of equipment was a separate issue. Given the Alliance's current production capacity, the pressure was considerable. However, as the Alliance developed, this pressure should be rapidly relieved. At the same time, the substantial military orders would stimulate the development of the Alliance's industry. As for manpower shortages, with new units being formed and the replenishment needed for previous units' losses, Gu Heng would need to recruit nearly 140,000 people into the military in total. The former Alliance definitely couldn't have handled such recruitment, nearing the limits of a second-level mobilization order in terms of available manpower. But now, the pressure wasn't too great. The Western Desert, the 3 Western provinces, the population migrating to the Alliance. The Alliance's total population had soared from 25 million to 45 million. The newly added manpower could now be put to good use. After the mobilization order had been lifted, the expected available manpower was also more than 800,000. The current Alliance army, including the Rage Bear Legion, had so far only used 600,000 people. For those who had recently joined the Alliance, enlisting was not a bad choice. As soon as they joined, a private's treatment was equivalent to an E6 level. If they stayed for a while, performed well in training, or gained some military tenure, it wasn't unlikely for them to be promoted to officer or non-commissioned officer rank. At the very least, reaching the level of veteran soldier was not a bottleneck. Veteran soldier treatment was equivalent to an E9 rank, and the transition to this level was direct upon retirement. As for injuries, sacrifices, these were inevitable fates for a military career. However, the Alliance's compensation policies had always been relatively generous, mitigating many people's worries about their future. These 140,000 people would enter the training camps established all over the world by the Alliance Military and Political Department for initial training. After that, Gu Heng would work his magic among them. The training costs for 140,000 people, even if all were only trained to the T5 level, with a favor granting training to 100 people, would still consume 1,400 points. Adding the approximately 1,300 points needed for the Wind Extinguishing Brigade, the total cost would be 2,700 points. As the military scaled up and higher standards were required for troop quality, training costs, once thought negligible, began to feel significant. Still, all things considered, this was not the main expense. The real expense lay in the cultivation of the starfighters. So far, the number of Phoenix warriors remained around 30 people. Commander Maddens was already quite satisfied with this. When he was wandering in the past, he had never dared to hope that in less than 3 years, their numbers could swell from 7 to 36. As for Gu Hang, not continuing to increase the number of starfighters wasn't because he didn't want to, it was mainly because it was too expensive. Gu Hang had calculated that the average cost of training a new Phoenix recruit, taking into account the initial selection and training, as well as the exchange for seeds, was about 600 to 700 favor points per person. This was quite an expensive feat, and using starfighters in war was unquestionably a luxurious act. Beyond the expense of favor points, the powered armor and other exclusive equipment for starfighters also represented a considerable outlay. The reason for not having previously increased the number of starfighters further was also due to a shortage of powered armor. Currently, the powered armor used by the Phoenix, aside from their original 7 units, were all ordered by Gu Hang from the Gu commercial firm. 50,000 tax currency per unit, not including any other equipment. And if we include other equipment, not to mention cheaper bomb guns and chainsaw swords, then there are thrusters, plasma guns or thermo guns, powered swords, missile racks, and even Terminator armor, dreadnought mechs, all of these cost a fortune. Buying them just isn't feasible. Not to mention those other pieces of equipment, just to get another 20 powered armors would drive the price up to 1 million tax currency. At that time, it was Gu Hang who, in order to tie these starfighters to his own battlefield, and given the commitments made to Phoenix amidst the onslaught of the green-skin pirates, gritted his teeth while his cousin directly paid the sum as a gift to cope with the situation. Subsequent purchases would be too costly. And the channels for buying are very difficult. Not only are interstellar warrior powered armors expensive, but their production capacity is also low. Usually, only some sect of mechanics foundry worlds possess the technology to produce them. But the key point is that the demand isn't high. A standard starfighter battle group, when fully staffed, consists of only about 1,000 people. Even factoring in a surplus for reserves, the total demand wouldn't exceed 1,500 to 2,000 suits at most. And these powered armors can only be worn by starfighters. The regular powered armor that regular people can use is not the same thing. Given such limited demand, many foundry worlds capable of production don't manufacture in high quantities. If you only buy a small quantity, they can't be bothered to produce it for you, you can only hope there's surplus stock. If you buy in bulk, they're willing to start up production, but then the price is unaffordable. Ultimately, when it comes to powered armor, the notion that it's better to buy than to build is entirely inapplicable. The production of powered armor, as well as other starfighter-specific equipment, must rely on in-house manufacturing. It's simply a matter of spending more grace points. In fact, Gu Hang had already made up his mind to extract some starfighter-related technologies. After completing the Phoenix in Peril storyline, he could specifically choose to extract starfighter technologies during the tech draw, which greatly reduced the element of chance. Putting the tech lottery aside for now, Gu Hang also planned out a sum of grace points, about 15,000 or so, estimating it would be enough to train 20 new members of the Phoenix New Blood. They themselves would also require at least 6 months to 2 years of growth, and during this time, the Alliance's self-produced powered armors should be available. Even if they can't be made, or it's not cost-effective to do so, drawing out technologies and pulling out black boxes to distribute them would also be feasible. And the 15,000 grace points spent would bring additional benefits besides the 20 new members of the Phoenix New Blood. That would be a large number of elite soldiers at T2, T3, and T4 levels. T4 level soldiers would be distributed among various units. These are the first batch to be eliminated during the starfighter training process, those with the weakest potential. In regular units, they are also top-notch soldiers and their arrival would be warmly welcomed by those units. As for T3 and T2 level soldiers, they all went to the 10th Brigade. This special combat brigade now had a size of over 4,000, all of whom were filtered out during the process of starfighter training. With the Alliance's self-produced exoskeleton armor, they could also operate bomb guns and chainsaw swords individually. Their combat power might be far less than that of the genuine starfighters in a real confrontation, they might be easily slaughtered. But against other regular infantry units, they could inflict just as much chaos. The difference in numbers was significant. After all, there are only a few dozen starfighters, they aren't available for every mission. The Special Combat Brigade of several thousand, on the other hand, was different. In fact, during the previous Blackbird campaign, the 10th Brigade had already demonstrated outstanding performance. They frequently led the assaults on key targets, often fulfilling their missions without tarnishing their reputation and reducing heavy casualties for regular units. They also conducted special airborne operations, infiltrations behind enemy lines, decapitation tactics against enemy data transmission and command nodes, and sabotaging enemy logistics centers. At that time, the Special Combat Brigade with only 2,000 men had proved more useful than several divisions. Chapter 533. After completing the army construction, including the Phoenix Battle Group, Gu Heng only had 18,000 grace points left. In fact, regarding the military, Gu Heng had another minor expense. That was the Black Arrow Corps. The army led by Prabhuv consisted of 5 bona fide divisions of the Alliance, stationed on Hagian Star, helping Ness Lumen stabilize the domestic situation. After all, the army of the Lumen Kingdom had been basically smashed in the war a year ago. That place was not peaceful, and it needed troops to be stationed there. At the same time, Gu Heng also needed an army there to ensure the stability of the victory fruits obtained by the Alliance in the last war. However, with the sizable Lumen Kingdom population of 40 million, which was almost as many as the native population of Rage Owl Star, it was unrealistic to expect a force of less than 50,000 from 5 divisions to completely hold the ground. The Black Arrow Corps of the Alliance essentially held a fixed position in the capital of the Lumen Kingdom, Pinsir City. And the defense work of the entire kingdom still depended on the Lumen people themselves. Only when there were issues that they truly couldn't resolve would the Black Arrow Corps of the Alliance deploy. Also, the number of the Black Arrow Corps could not be too small. Gu Heng had already given Prabhuv the authorization to recruit soldiers locally in the Lumen Kingdom. Corresponding weapons and equipment would be transported to the Black Arrow Corps in supply ships between the 2 planets, mainly relying on the Gu commercial firm, making the trip every 6 months. Many of the extra individual equipment and artillery were used to establish new troops. These troops were distinct from the native troops of the Lumen Kingdom. Gu Heng required that the new troops absorbed by Prabhuv into the Black Arrow Corps must be reported to the Alliance Military and Political Department, following the official establishment process of the Alliance Army. At the same time, he demanded that in this troop, the initial ratio of officers from the Alliance should exceed 70%, and 10% of the Army's total members should be from the Alliance. On this basis, the Alliance Military and Political Department would grant this troop an official Alliance designation, under the Black Arrow Corps. All recruits would be given a probation period, and those who passed could obtain Alliance military ranks and Union citizen benefits directly. Once they acquired their Alliance identity cards, they could normally be promoted in military rank and position within the troops. The troops established on Hagian Star comprised 7 divisions, totaling over 40,000 people. They were regulated like garrison divisions, which are third-line troops. This was fairly standard. The elite and heavy weaponry of the Alliance were still not enough for its own direct-line troops, and there was also a lack of transport capacity to send them to Hagian Star. They could only transport some light weapons and outdated towed artillery. At most, there were a few double-digit heavy blaster rifles. Even ammunition supply and part of the weapon production had to be placed in the hands of the Lumen Kingdom locally. Fortunately, one of the G-series light weapon production lines that spilled over from Wuxing City had been transferred and shipped to Hagian Star through maritime transport. Although the production capacity was still average, it could at least fill some of the gaps. The training for these 40,000 people, as well as the over 4,000 people spun off from the original direct line troops of the Black Arrow Corps, all required supplementary training. Luckily, Gu Heng didn't need to attend to it himself. After the establishment of the 7 Hagian Star garrison divisions and the achievement of the required ratio of direct line officers and total soldiers under the badge system, it was directly reflected inside. Gu Heng just needed to click once, and with over 400 grace points spent, the training for over 40,000 people could be completed. After completing the training for the Hagian Star Group Army, the remaining 18,000 grace points were the grace points Gu Heng was about to use for the technology lottery. Without a second thought, he found the completed Phoenix will die from the event features, limited to Star Warrior technology, and then injected 6,000 grace points to do a 6-time draw in the 1000 tier. The 1000 tier prize pool was already very barren, with only a 2.5% probability for elite level and 20% for advanced level. Out of 6 draws, he hit 3, 2 at the advanced level and 1 at the basic level. This was already considered very lucky. The 2 advanced level draws were thermal melting weapon and rhino transport vehicle, the basic level was individual rocket nest. These 3 pieces of technology could also be considered special supplies for Star Warriors. Thermal melting was for Star Warriors who possess strong individual combat capabilities, to deliver fatal damage at close quarters when facing some big targets. For instance, if they encounter something like Titan mecha that can't be taken down by blaster rifles and chain swords, a thermal melting bomb could solve the problem. It's useful for Star Warriors. After all, they truly have the capacity to penetrate these big things' outer defenses, rush face to face to plant bombs, and then gracefully leave. Other troops could use it too, as conventional explosives aren't as reliable as thermal melting bombs when a soldier encounters something that needs to be blown up. And the Rhino transport vehicle is indeed the most commonly used vehicle by various starfighter battle groups. Compared with the Strider combat vehicle, the Rhino is bigger, heavier, has thicker armor, and more powerful firepower and load capacity. It also has special ports that can connect to the Interstellar Warrior-powered armor, allowing these superhumans to control the vehicle directly through their willpower via the black exoskeleton. In other words, in the hands of ordinary people, it's just a heavily armored combat vehicle, but in the hands of Star Warriors, this massive machine can achieve incredibly graceful and agile performance, completely different from its use by others. Chapter 534. Mortal troops don't necessarily need to use the Rhino troop transports, it's just a waste. After all, the cost of a Rhino is 5 times that of a walker. The same goes for individual rocket nests. Compared to regular rocket launchers, they are larger, heavier, have a greater ammunition capacity, and include a power armor interface. Ordinary soldiers can use them, but they need to be mounted on a vehicle, and they can't fire with just a thought like the Star Warriors can, which greatly increases accuracy. These pieces of equipment, I can't say they don't enhance the Phoenix battle group at all, but the actual effect is not significant. Take thermobaric bombs, for instance. The Alliance couldn't produce them before, but they could buy them, and they weren't that expensive. Rhino troop transporters aren't widespread among mortal troops due to cost and efficiency issues, but if they were only used by the Phoenix, with just about 30 people, 4 would suffice. With such a small demand, it's truly less cost-effective to manufacture than to buy. The rocket nest, on the other hand, has some utility, not for use by the Star Warriors, but for the Alliance's military departments. By removing the corresponding control systems and installing them on armored vehicles or directly on trucks, vehicle-mounted rocket launchers can be created to enhance the firepower of the artillery troops. In essence, it's not that the equipment is inadequate, but without scalability, there's no need to produce it oneself. There are only a little over 30 Star Warriors, what kind of equipment couldn't be bought individually? It would be uneconomical to spend all that effort setting up a production line just to serve 30-something people. Of course, as a technological reserve, it is still necessary. Essentially, the problem isn't caused by technological garbage, but by the scarcity of the Phoenix. The core reason restricting the increase in the numbers of the Phoenix is partly the number of people and partly the power armor. Next, what Gu Heng is hoping for is that the last 10,000 points of grace will pay off in the lottery at the 10,000 point level. At the 10,000 point level, there is a 60% chance of drawing elite level technology. Together with the Star Warrior technology restriction, tactical power armor itself is considered elite level. Overall, the odds are pretty good. Of course, if he hits that 30% chance for epic level technology and directly draws the manufacturing technology for something like Terminator power armor, that would be a bit of a prank, not knowing whether it's a blessing or a curse. Gu Heng rubbed his hands together, said a little prayer, and clicked to proceed. The last 10,000 points of grace disappeared like running water, and what they ultimately brought was indeed as hoped for. 4th generation majestic tactical power armor. He struck it lucky. But soon, the smile that had just spread across Gu Heng's face gradually faded again. Drawing the power armor technology he wanted was certainly good. Now, among the Phoenix, there are already several new recruits with superhuman organs who don't yet have armor to wear, not to mention, he had spent 15,000 points of grace to train 20 new Phoenix newbloods. These people won't have to worry about having power armor anymore. But the problem lies in the fact that what Gu Heng drew was the 4th generation majestic power armor. By now, Gu Heng had already crammed once on knowledge related to the Star Warriors. He also learned quite a bit about the power armor situation. Currently, the power armor models worn by the Empire's Star Warriors are very diverse, but the chaotic models are approximately developed from some generational baseline models. The most basic Star Warrior powered armor is clearly of 9 generations. However, it's not to say that newer generations are always better. In fact, over the past 10,000 years, not to mention power armor, even the entire empire has not only failed to advance in many technologies but has actually regressed. The Mechanical Church's scientific research relying mainly on archaeology might not be a joke. Humanity's current level of technology, after the Great Disruption, is far from the human golden age before the establishment of the empire. It's even somewhat inferior to the times when the emperor was among the people. Many generations of power armor are still in production today, with only variations in production volume. For example, the most numerous model of power armor currently in the empire is the 8th generation Sky Eagle type, which is what the Phoenix are all equipped with now. The 8th generation is not the most widespread because it's powerful, but because the technology is mature, mass production is easy, maintenance is simple, and performance is quite decent. These comprehensive factors make it stand out. The 4th generation majestic power armor that Gu Heng just drew, on the other hand, is different. Its performance is excellent, but production and maintenance are difficult. As of now, not many 4th generation armors remain. In some battle groups with a deeper history, this type of armor is even a relic passed down for thousands of years, worn only by the most outstanding warriors, a symbol of honor. It is said that some battle groups and foundry worlds still have the capability to produce this armor, but the output is probably pitifully small. Well, now the issue is, Gu Heng can mass produce it here. Subsequently, it's likely that the entire Phoenix will be equipped with majestic type armor. Although it's not a sin, it's really an eyesore. But what can be done about it? Gu Heng deeply sighed. Could I just let it go unused? If there's a problem, we'll solve it later. As for the power armor, the black box can churn out 2 units every month. That's practically free. Apart from that, he glanced briefly, the power armor technology, the Alliance had the base technological capacity to pull out production lines and mass produce it. All sorts of technologies had been schemed off earlier, such as ceramic steel technology, compressed energy technology, high-energy anti-gravity engine technology. Yet, due to the many technical challenges within the gigantic power armors themselves, even having the master machine black box, the production lines created will still demand a lot from the people during the manufacturing process. The difficulty of mass production won't be small. It's estimated that the speed of subsequent self-production would be about 3 units a month. Mainly because although the engineering volume is not considered large, it requires too many high-tech workers. Many processes need at least technicians or higher-ranked people to use production machines to forge them. But as long as it's producible, that will do. Thus calculated, 5 units a month, by the time this batch of Phoenix new blood has grown up, not only will they have enough to wear, but there will even be a surplus. The rest can be saved for a sudden increase in soldiers later. If it really comes to it, secretly sell them. A normal power armor goes for 50,000 a set. This could sell for at least 100,000 a set if historical factors weren't considered. 50,000 points of grace spent, the changes it brought to the Alliance were quite significant. Although the technologies drawn out were mostly exclusive to the Star Warriors, less stimulating the economy, it brought strong developmental momentum to both military construction and talent cultivation for the Alliance. Moreover, the Alliance itself still had great potential for development to unleash. Apart from Wuxing City being the industrial center, in many areas, the Alliance was still in a state of waiting for revival. A vast workforce hadn't been fully utilized. On wastelands, people urgently needed to invest their labor to rebuild their homes. When Ozania reported to Gu Heng, she said she was confident that by the next imperial tax payment, in a year and a half, she could raise the per capita output of Wuxing City to above 3.5, the global per capita output to above 1. This also meant, based on the current population, the Alliance could have an annual output value exceeding 65 million tax currency. Gu Heng was certainly satisfied with this outcome. His Prime Minister had promised him a 20% GDP growth goal for 2 years, what was there not to be pleased with? What's more, his Madam Prime Minister might have even overlooked the difficulty of fulfilling this promise. Because the population of the Alliance was bound to grow. Apart from the policies encouraging childbirth on the native soil, a large number of immigrants from other regions were also inevitable. During Gu Hang's most recent trip to Karolia 3, he brought along a batch of warriors from the Rage Bear Legion, rotating out the troops who had initially been struggling on Karolia 3. Additionally, he dispatched 5 more garrison divisions, the 21st to 25th, along with the 59th Mechanical Brigade, and a large amount of ammunition and supplies to Karolia 3. From this point on, the number of soldiers the Alliance had fighting on Karolia 3 would reach a scale of 100,000. The given reason was to support the fight of our human brethren, to offer some humble assistance. But in reality, what Gu Hang did was no different from other powers plundering Karolia 3. I've been helping you so diligently, it's only proper to help evacuate some more refugees, right? Chapter 535. The Rage Bear Legion goes without saying, they fight according to the orders of the Military Affairs Department and the Star Domain Military Headquarters, and Gu Hang won't fuss over the details with them. But the supply of the Rage Bear Legion was delivered by Rage Owl Star, which is not provided by the Imperial Military Department. Don't think ammunition is cheap, especially the shells for heavy artillery, ammunition for bomb guns, replacement parts for technical equipment. These are all expensive. Moreover, the newly brought in 5 garrison divisions and 1 armored composite brigade are not from the Rage Bear Legion but from the Rage Owl Star's Planetary Defense Army. They surely won't fight for free. The construction cost for these 40,000 troops has already reached 1 million tax currency. The Alliance also transported a large amount of food and fresh water. This wave of investment by Gu Hang has already reached nearly 2 million tax currency in total cost. In this situation, Gu Hang, on Karolia 3, signed an evacuation agreement for the refugees with the government on the other side. In the future, the Alliance will still further dispatch troops, provide ammunition, military weapons and equipment, food, fresh water, textiles. The total aid is estimated to reach the scale of 7 million tax currency. This amount of money is substantial, but the Alliance can afford it. A considerable part of it is direct military participation in the war, offsetting wealth, aid in various forms of ammunition, technical equipment, is also replenishment for the Alliance's troops on the front lines, not given to the Karolia people but counted in this 7 million support. The only thing really handed over to the Karolia people are some light weapons. This is normal, the Alliance's military factories also need orders. The various types of heavy weapons are eagerly awaited by the Alliance's own troops and they have no spare to give to the Karolia people, but some G-series rifles and such, have plenty of excess production capacity. The same is true for ammunition. War on the homeland of Rage Owl Star has largely quieted down, ammunition consumption immediately decreased, and the surplus must be sold off, right? Fresh water and food follow the same logic. Rage Owl Star still has a relatively abundant freshwater resource, with extensive oceans suitable for desalination. As for food, the Green Valley region had a bumper harvest last year, and the Rage Owl Star people couldn't even consume it all, it would just be left to age if not exported. Moreover, a substantial part of these resources will be provided to refugee camps. And the people living in the refugee camps, in the future, they will all be people of the Alliance. And the 7 million tax currency aid in exchange, is that the Alliance will help Karolia 3 evacuate 10 million refugees. Among all forces plundering the population of Karolia 3, this agreement is considered to be quite ruthless. The reason for such ruthlessness is the result of Gu Hang's efforts. This is the role of reputation, starting to slowly show its effectiveness. Of course, there's also the political influence of the Gu family. In fact, not only did he earn, but the Gu commercial firm did as well. A significant portion of the transportation orders, not only from Rage Owl Star but also from other major forces. Whether transferring materials or personnel, a substantial number of ships are needed. The Gu commercial firm got pretty fat just from these transportation orders. As for the population transferred from Karolia 3, Rage Owl Star is very welcoming, the quality of the population is actually not bad. In stark contrast, the population from Hagian Star is very troublesome. Hagian Star has also migrated hundreds of thousands of people, all from the Lumen Kingdom. They are truly illiterate, the vast majority come from serf backgrounds, can't read, don't hold any skills needed in an industrial society, and the cost of intermediate training is substantial. Compared to the Rage Owl Star people, although there's a considerable percentage of illiteracy, it's nowhere near as high as the illiteracy rate of the Hagian Star people. Even among the illiterate, there are disparities. There's a reason for that. Rage Owl Star is a wasteland planet, its residents may not be literate, but they must have some skills. He may know how to drive, repair cars, assemble and use firearms, tinker with some junk machinery. Without these skills, one couldn't survive in the wastelands. Quite a few wastelanders, under the system established by the Alliance, entered schools and learned enough characters during adult education, even just a few hundred or 1,000, to read and understand written articles, and communicate in writing, which is enough to become a qualified industrial population. The population from Karolia 3 has similar attributes. Many of them mingled in the underbelly of Nest Capital, living worse than livestock, but their literacy rates are stronger than those of the wastelanders, with many having experience working in factories and mines. Work is necessary to survive. Even in Nest Capital, there is still the most basic education, where children around 5 or 6 years old go to school for a couple of years before they can work as child laborers. The difference in population quality means that the value that different immigrants can immediately bring to the table varies greatly. However, overall, at this stage, Rage Owl Star is welcoming all comers. Even if they come from Hagian Star and need some time to be cultivated for modernization before being sent to work as farm laborers in the Green Valley region, that's fine too. A qualified labor force, given normal opportunities and a platform, can create far more value than it consumes. There must be surplus labor value. What's more, the efficient system of the Alliance, which eliminates the middle layer, requires no taxation, yet surpasses it, is much stronger in collecting surplus value than the conventional private property system. Chapter 536. Nearly half a year whizzed by, with the Alliance developing methodically. As the Alliance premier, Ozania was constantly overwhelmed. But she had gotten used to it. Ever since she took up this position, she had never been free from busyness. Overtime? Except for eating and sleeping, there was no time for rest. Talking about exploitation, she, as the Alliance premier, was the most severely exploited. Under her leadership, the Alliance government had already achieved some of the goals set earlier. This was the third year since the Alliance's establishment and the first year of unification. It was estimated that the total annual output for the coming year could grow from over 50 million to more than 68 million. That was 3 million more than what she had promised the governors for a 2-year increase. Of course, this was a joyful achievement. Yet another goal, the per capita productivity index, was estimated to be unattainable. Mainly because Rage Owl Star was about to experience a population surge of 10 million, and a substantial amount of the development budget was spent on settling and assimilating these people, which resulted in the neglect of construction projects in remote provinces. Certainly, the added 13 million in annual output did owe a great deal to the immigrants. Most immigrants headed to Wixing City and Biking Valley. The former, as an industrial center, needed people, while the latter had ample land resources to be opened up, with enough capacity to absorb a large population without becoming congested and overburdened. Gu Heng didn't have any dissatisfaction with this situation. He was quite satisfied with Ozania's work results. As for not meeting the per capita output target, it was expected. Besides, wasn't it still short of 2 years? Just half a year so far. During this period, Gu Heng's time was mostly spent shuttling between Karolia 3 and Rage Owl Star. On the one hand, he maintained his presence on Rage Owl Star to make some overarching decisions on planet development, and on the other hand, he actively participated in interstellar politics. At the same time, he was also waiting for the investigative team from the Sun Lord to arrive. On Karolia 3, due to the same reason, many people who were stranded there were many. Some were present at the scene when Galaraldo disappeared, and others belonged to the investigative teams at the Star Sector, Star Domain, and Space Domain levels. Everyone was waiting. But today, the Sun investigative team suddenly issued new news. They were not coming. This message spread to Karolia 3, causing an uproar. Complaints and curses were heard everywhere. What did they mean by not coming suddenly? In previous communications, they had even set off and had been on the road for half a year. To say they wouldn't come and to suddenly turn back, what was the meaning of that? So what were we waiting for more than half a year for? Waiting in vain? Amidst the grievances, some politically astute individuals immediately sensed a lot from this information and perceived certain special signals. Firstly, there were potential changes within Tianma Star Sector. The Apostle of War isn't being sought after anymore? Responsibility not pursued? Of course not. The Sun investigative team still issued their demands and orders. First, they approved the joint investigation conclusion given by the third-level investigation team, acknowledging the disappearance of Galaraldo and demanding that the Dragonhawk Star Domain maintain a team to continue searching for the missing war apostles in life or in death. The words were stern, but compared to their previous attitude, there was no question that it had softened a great deal. The space domain government had directly taken itself out of the equation. The star domain government only needed to dispatch one team to maintain the investigation, that is to say, they just needed to go through the motions. After searching with such great effort for a year and finding nothing, could they really expect that a mere investigation team could find the war apostles as time went on and clues grew fewer? It was unrealistic. As for the matter of responsibility, such a significant incident had occurred, yet no definitive culprit had been found, so the only conclusion could be an accident, a scheme of the abyssal demons. This also meant that it was impossible to find a person to take the blame. Well, you couldn't expect the demons to be responsible, could you? And you couldn't solve it, either. So, who should this responsible person be? I am about to die. When Paydesi uttered these words, his grey hair was a bit disheveled. Despite having tried to conceal it with makeup, his bloodshot eyes inevitably revealed his despair. This was the first time Gu Heng had seen him like this. In his memory, the head of the Paydesi was always particular about his image, his hair never out of place, his demeanor full of energy, his smile always refreshing. It seemed that, in the face of death, everyone was the same. The others present, regardless of what they thought about this matter, at least outwardly, all showed grief. This was a meeting, attended by the Tianma Star Sector Circle centered around the head of the Paydesi, 6 people in total. Aside from himself, there was his brother, Little Paydesi. Beyond them were 2 other families of the Tianma Iron Triangle, the Gu family and the Fufana family. Representing the Gu family were Wang Qi and Gu Heng. Wang Qi was the actual operator of the Gu commercial firm, while Gu Heng was the family head and also represented the soon-to-rise Tianma Star Sector Psychic Association and Rage Owl Star. The 2 members of the Fufana family were General Fufana, dressed in a navy uniform, and Colonel Yelazaya. The former was the family's stalwart sea anchor, while the latter was a rising star within the family and the future successor. This meeting was the head of the star sector, Paydesi, settling his affairs. Little Paydesi, beside him, had a gloomy face. His shrill voice rose, "We could resist." He hadn't finished speaking when his brother interrupted him. "What nonsense are you talking? We Paydesis have been loyal subjects of the empire since our ancestors. No matter what treatment we receive, we should accept it gladly." He scolded sharply and then observed the expressions of the 4 people from the Gu and Fufana families. Being scolded like that, Little Paydesi eventually shut up. Gu Heng maintained a serious expression on his face, but upon hearing Little Paydesi's words, he almost laughed out loud. Resist? With what would they resist? If they really started some form of resistance, the first to cut supplies would be the Gu, the first to fire cannons at Flying Wing Star would be the Fufana. Paydesi sighed and faced the 4 allies again, repeating his sentence, "I am about to die. The Sun Lord's investigation team may not be coming anymore and have accepted the 3rd level government's investigative conclusion, but they demand someone take responsibility. That person is me and Governor Akuna." Akuna tried to flee but was already intercepted by the Star Domain Justice Department, and by now, he is probably dead. I am ready to calmly accept my fate. The Star Domain and Space Domain, in a show of respect for me, will allow me some time before I end it myself, and with that, the matter will be closed. Pausing, he continued, "But what I can't let go of the most is my brother." Little Paydesi stood on the side with a stern face, silent. "After the death of Akuna and myself, he emphasized our biggest problem will be the weakened control over the star sector political situation and over Karolia 3, no new heads or Karolia governors have been appointed yet. The Fatches family will surely not miss this opportunity. I have no other requests, but we must not let go of these 2 positions. At least, they cannot fall into the hands of Fatches, or else we will all be in great trouble." With that, he looked at General Fufana. "General, I hope you will come out of retirement to run for the position of Star Sector head that I leave behind." Having said this, without waiting for General Fufana's reply, his gaze turned to Wang Qi and Gu Heng. The Gu family might have someone who can take on the responsibilities of the Karolia governor. Chapter 537. After concluding their discussion with the leader Paydesi, several people took their leave, and Gu Heng returned with his mother. On the way, they were silent, each lost in thought. Only after they got back to their secure residence did they begin to discuss the whole matter. Wang Qi reminded Gu Heng with great concern, "Karolia governor, you mustn't be confused. Right now, it's a huge trap, incomparable to when you went to Rage Owl Star on your own. If you handle it poorly, it could spell death for you, as well as for the entire Gu clan without a place to be buried. I understand, I won't be fooled, Gu Heng nodded and then sighed, it's such an enticing piece of fat, it's a pity it's covered in dog shit. Gu Heng's lament was heartfelt. Honestly, when Pei Desi proposed to promote someone from the Gu family to assume the role of Karolia governor after Akuna's death, he was indeed very tempted. How could he not be moved? By comparison, Karolia's population was 1,000 times that of Rage Owl Star. If Gu Heng could control this planet, and with the black box, complete the political and economic transformation of the entire planet, igniting the strong productivity of its tens of nest capitals and a total population of 40 billion, then the value of this planet would become immensely vast. But, the difficulty was too high. Karolia 3 isn't Rage Owl Star, there are massive and intricate native forces here, objectively speaking, while there is potential, the huge population also brings with it terrifying environmental pressure. Gu Heng couldn't replicate his success on Rage Owl Star straightforwardly on Karolia 3, with its entirely different ecology. Moreover, the situation here on its own was bad enough, compounded by the political struggles of the Tianma Star Sector, a core vortex, further compounded by the massive invasion of the plague demon that hadn't just been controlled but was showing a trend of worsening. That was what Gu Heng meant by fat covered in dog shit. Now was absolutely not a good time to take over Karolia 3. At this point, whoever took the helm would be the scapegoat, a sacrifice. Old Fufana also didn't accept Pei Desi's invitation to run for the next Star Sector head, did he? Gu Heng quietly asked. Yes, General Fufana seems to have no such intention, Wang Qi responded. Gu Heng slightly nodded, that's easy to understand. They are a military family, why run for Star Sector head? To unnecessarily stand out, yet lacking the support of political forces. The difficulty of getting elected is not small, and the key issue is that even after being elected, there's no tangible benefit but instead direct pressure from fatches. Wang Qi sighed, it's difficult. Gu Heng knew what his mother was lamenting about. With Akuna and Pei Desi's deaths, the investigation teams from the Sun Lord no longer came, the Star Domain and Cosmos Domain investigation teams left without a fuss, leaving behind a huge mess. The original balance of power in the Tianma Star Sector was going to be directly shattered. Objectively speaking, Pei Desi was a very competent Star Sector head. Although there was Fatches, a political opponent within the Star Sector, who also had immense influence over the Star Realm army there, he was still able to support his own brother to become the Flying Wing Star Governor and ally with Karolia's Governor Akuna. With population and production he firmly suppressed the Fatches family. Additionally, the alliance with the Fufana family and the economic strength of Flying Wing Star, especially its shipbuilding industry, strongly affected the Imperial Navy troops. In this situation, he was unquestionably very advantaged within the Star Sector, not like those Star Sector heads who are mere figureheads in many other Star Sectors. Even more valuable, he was a man who knew restraint. Despite his great advantages, and even though relations were very bad, he never pushed Fatches to a dead end, lest the super-powerful family who controlled 3 planets with a total population of over 10 billion be driven into a corner. All struggles were mostly kept under control, also objectively ensuring the stability of the entire Star Sector. Although there were some missteps such as trapping Gu Heng's predecessor on Rage Owl Star to become the governor, on the whole, he was an outstanding head, largely able to maintain the stable situation of the Tianma Star Sector. If this situation continued uninterrupted, the Tianma Star Sector could foreseeably continue to enjoy decades of peace. In the foreseeable future, no one could adjust this stable situation in the Tianma Star Sector. But, the disappearance of Galaraldo completely shattered the foundation of stability. The deaths of Akuna and Pei Desi represented a huge power vacuum that had suddenly emerged. In the past few years, what action would the Fatches family, which has long been suppressed, take? How would one quell the increasingly severe demon's invasion in Karolia? Those above seemed to have hardly considered this problem, hastily and brutally killing 2 people, holding them responsible, and thus declared an end to it all. And Gu Heng, despite being powerless over this, looks like I triggered all of this? But honestly, even as the instigator, he had not anticipated that things would unfold in this direction. It could only be said that the existing political contradictions within the Star Sector, coupled with the crisis Karolia itself was facing, after a poke from Gu Heng, could no longer hold. Later, old Fufana came to visit Gu Heng and his mother with his granddaughter Yelizaya. In conversation, as expected by Wang Qi and Gu Heng, the Fufana family had no intention of taking over. After Pei Desi's death, they did not wish to be pushed to the forefront to confront those sinister forces lurking in the dark. Chapter 538. But the situation that followed began to descend into chaos. The next day, Paydesi ended his life with dignity, and the various investigation teams hastily departed Karolia 3 with Akuna and Paydesi's corpse in tow. What followed was an all-out war between two factions within the Star Sector. One side was the opportunistic Faches, who began to vie for the positions of Karolia 3 governor and Tianma Star region's head. Unlike other places, Faches had the capital of 3 civilized planets on one hand and significant influence over the Star Realm Armed Forces Dragonhawk 3rd Legion on the other. If they took over Karolia, they really had the capacity to stabilize the situation here. Currently, the Star Realm army struggling here numbered 7 million, but they were fully capable of doubling that figure within a year. If that wasn't enough, the planetary defense forces from the 3 planets could transfer tens of millions more. This was a tremendous advantage in terms of volume. Once they gained control over Karolia, combined with the original Faches I/2/3 planets, the population they would control would exceed 50 billion, nearly 80% of the entire Star Sector's population. With this might, taking on the position of Tianma Star region's head would make them the undisputed rulers of the entire Star Sector, returning the family to its former glory. This so-called family glory referred to the history of the Faches family. Before the Tianma Star Sector was reclaimed by the Empire, it was the Faches family in charge here. After the Golden Age of humanity, when major worlds fell into disarray and ruled themselves, the Faches family rapidly grew in this dark era. They controlled 3 planets within their star system, formed a tri-star political alliance, and became the rulers of it. After the Dark Age ended and the Imperial Navy arrived at the Faches star system, they offered up the 3 planets, submitted to the Empire, and actively participated in the Empire's expeditions. This allowed them to retain the governorships of the 3 planets, permanently keeping them within their family. They even held control over the entire Tianma Star Sector at one point. Many of the past heads of the Star Sector were under the control of the Faches family. Until the arrival of Paydesi, this high-ranking official from the Star Domain government, who, during his decades as Tianma Star region's head, aggressively diminished the Faches family's control over the entire Star Sector, almost pushing their influence back within their own star system. Now was their chance to reclaim their family's glory and become Tianma's shepherds once again. But similarly, the other faction wouldn't sit back and give up so easily. Paydesi was dead, but only he was dead. The political legacy he left behind was far from extinct, and even his brother remained the Flying Wing Star governor. This also showed how rough the Empire's handling of Tianma Star Sector's issues were. But this was also very much the Empire's style. Before his death, Paydesi managed to secure enough for himself. He already had extensive connections within the Star Domain government, and quite a number of people sympathized with his death, feeling that the Sun Lord was acting recklessly. They all knew he was being scapegoated. He made good use of this to secure his brother's position, ensuring that Paydesi wasn't implicated, and even attempted to continue tying the Gu clan and Fufana together. If all of Paydesi's previous requests had been fulfilled, it would have indeed been quite stable. Fufana as the head, accompanied by the Imperial Navy, was still from his own faction. The Gu clan would pick someone to be the Karolia governor, also from his faction, and Paydesi remained the Flying Wing Star governor. In this way, the political entity that had been comprehensively suppressing the Faches family initially could still largely be preserved. Originally, Paydesi might have had many ways to ensure that the Gu clan and Fufana obediently followed his plans. But no matter how many methods he had, they were useless now. He was out of time. After the Gu clan and Fufana rejected his plans, he couldn't even manage a second round of persuasion and lobbying before he was killed. And Paydesi, in Gu Hang's view, was completely lacking his brother's abilities. After his brother's death, he openly turned hostile, cursing the Gu clan and Fufana as traitors at multiple meetings and banquets, while also fully mobilizing the political legacy his brother left, starting a comprehensive political war against Faches. This war mainly took place on 2 battlegrounds, one within Karolia 3 internally, the other being the Star Domain government. A new governor could be appointed by the Empire from above, but the Central Empire couldn't manage everything. After all, it boiled down to reports from each level of government and, generally speaking, if there were no major issues, the Central Empire would approve them. Here, the voice of the Star Domain level government was very significant. But equally, being a governor meant that one must have sufficient control over the entire planet. He was the top military and political leader, burdened with the heavy responsibility of collecting imperial tax, and he must be able to quell the planet's troubles to ensure the tax was properly collected. No matter what the methods employed were. Were there instances of governors being parachuted in? Of course. But unless it was a foolhardy death sentence, any parachuted governor had to be a strong dragon arriving with powerful resources to suppress the local snakes. Would the Star Domain government want to send such a strong dragon? Probably not. Although the Star Domain government is large and powerful, its resources are still limited. The other approach is to choose someone from among the local powers, which eliminates this problem. If this model is used, the Star Domain government will fully consider the situation within the star sector and planets to find a person they believe can stabilize the situation. This is exactly the point that Fatches and Paydesi are competing over. On Yunluo Star, officials at all levels of the Star Domain government who have a say will probably keep welcoming lobbyists in the following period. The other battlefield is within the planet itself, which involves selecting this local power. To put it plainly, both families are looking for a spokesperson. This spokesperson needs to be strong enough to unite other local forces and also needs to stand on their side. In this, there will undoubtedly be all kinds of alliances and interest trades. And that's just what's on the surface. In the dark, assassination, lies, conspiracies, framing, and slander, none can be spared. The Gu clan and Fufana huddled together, somewhat revealing a hint of neutrality, but who can truly be neutral? The Gu clan is still alright, at least not long ago, they had a history of trying to mend relations with Fatches, when Gu Hang cleaned out Blackbird Heavy Industries on Rage Owl Star, although he slightly coerced Fatches and made them bleed a little, in essence, he was cleaning up after them. The evidence of the Ironman rebellion he obtained from Blackbird was also hidden and not handed over to Paydesi. But it's different for Fufana, they had not refrained from taking part in suppressing Fatches in the past. They had a grudge. Over the years, the intertwining close relations between the Gu clan and Fufana and their alliance with Paydesi have become complex and difficult to cut off at once. Simply put, the Tianma fleet is present in the star sector, Gu commercial firm primarily operates within the star sector, and Rage Owl Star is also within it. You simply cannot avoid being involved in this whirlpool that is gradually affecting the entire star sector. Wang Qi had become visibly busy and had repeatedly expressed dissatisfaction with her son's carefree attitude, which was equivalent to a hands-off shopkeeper. But each time, Gu Hang just smiled and perfunctorily brushed off a few sentences without truly getting involved. It wasn't that he didn't take it seriously, but rather, he had other matters to attend to. What does your squabbling have to do with me? Taking advantage of this opportunity to gain some real benefits is what truly matters. He had set his sights on two things. First, of course, was the population. On Corollia 3, the least valuable thing, yet the most precious in Gu Hang's eyes, was its population. Apart from the population, this world was worthless in his eyes. Previously, there was still Governor Akuna with Paydesi backing him. Now, all that is gone, and for Gu Hang to harvest the population, it has become much easier and more convenient. As for the second thing he was eyeing, it was the position of Governor of Hajian Star. He had no interest in being the Governor of Corollia, at least not for now. He was neither a local power nor strong enough to dominate in such a vast place as Corollia. But his interest in becoming the Governor of Hajian Star was not only existent but also significant. Chapter 539. Theoretically, the position of total Governor of Hajian Star is now under the control of Gu Hang. The current governor is Ness Lumen, and this king is indeed under the control of Gu Hang. Not only is his mind controlled by Gu Hang, but the military, political, and economic aspects of the country are also under the alliance's control. However, this type of control does not represent the alliance's control over the entire Hajian Star. The position of Ness Lumen as governor comes from the special political ecosystem of Hajian Star, the King's Council. Those elected by the King's Council will temporarily hold the position of governor of Hajian Star until the next election. After the last session of the King's Council, the Lumen Kingdom, which had chosen the wrong side during the previous war and was beaten by the military of Rage Owl Star, rightfully lost its seat as governor. According to the political traditions of Hajian Star, Ness was supposed to resign after the previous tax collection was completed. But after the King's Council, he forcibly held on to the position without resigning. Specifically, he did not proceed with the official resignation and nomination of the next governor to the Star Sector government. In the past of Hajian Star, there were those who did the same, but their ends were quite unpleasant. At its core, the governor of this planet is still the King's Council entity. The King's Council, of course, does not possess power in itself, but the meaning it represents is very crucial. The 7 most powerful countries on the planet, along with a host of smaller nations, discuss major issues within this council. The most important issue is finding a way to pool the imperial tax each country has to pay and submit it together to maintain the stability of the entire planet. Holding on to the governor's position and not paying? It has never been the case that one becomes the governor to dominate the planet, but that one must be able to dominate the planet to become the real governor. No matter how this ability to dominate is acquired. Clearly, the current Nesluman, or rather, the alliance behind him, does not possess the ability to dominate Hagian Star. The other kings on that planet are also not convinced. After Nesluman refused to hand over the governor's position, they independently elected a new governor within the King's Council. This person is from the first great kingdom of Hagian Star, Panbos. They have already begun to initiate their relationships, attempting to secure the Empire's recognition. Of course, this bunch of kings is too weak in political influence. Forget the Star Domain government, even here at the Star Sector government, they have hardly any paths to take, not to mention that the current political situation in the Star Sector is chaotic. Their past connections were mainly with the GU commercial firm and the sect of mechanics in the Tianma Star Sector. But the former is now firmly on Nesluman's side. When they seek them out, the people at GU commercial firm generally just advise them to accept their fate. As for the latter, the influence of the sect of mechanics is extremely low in the Tianma Star Sector, even resembling the domain of a state religion more. The organizational structure is well established, its influence significant, and there is even a headquarters for the sisterhood. In any case, when it comes to political maneuvering, they are set to be severely suppressed. But they obviously did not place much hope in this aspect. While actively engaging in politics, their actions within the planet are of even greater importance. They have already declared that they refuse to submit imperial tax to the Lumen Kingdom. The tax collection work is being handled by Panbos Kingdom and has almost received the support of the remaining 85% of the countries. The annual imperial tax of Hagian Star is 40 million tax currency. This shortfall is definitely something the Lumen Kingdom cannot fill on its own, and Guhang cannot possibly sell everything to shoulder it either. It must still be paid by the entirety of Hagian Star. So what to do? The only choice was to fight. Actually, a battle had already taken place. However, it was not Guhang's side that made the move. On the other side, the king of Panbos, upon being elected as the new governor, rallied an army and issued a warning to the Lumen Kingdom, also sending a warning through the Star Language Tower to the GU commercial firm. Their warning to the Lumen Kingdom was harsh, labeling Nesluman as a traitor and enumerating 9 grave crimes. But the warning to the GU clan was relatively tactful, roughly meaning, we have been doing business for many years, and our relationship has always been quite friendly. Hagian Star is very poor, and there is nothing worth taking for the GU commercial firm by means other than trade. In addition, the people of Lumen are very brave, and if even the little they have is taken away, they would also fight to the bitter end with all their might. This was essentially a declaration of their stance, but Guhang did not respond to them. The army rallied by the King's Council, seeing this, then advanced into the territory of the Lumen Kingdom. However, their determination to wage war was clearly not that strong, and their logistical supply capabilities did not support them in truly assembling a very large and elite army for a massive invasion of the Lumen Kingdom. Among them, even Night Titan, there was only one from the Panbos Kingdom. The newly established army of the Lumen Kingdom was certainly no match for them. After all, the Lumen people hardly had any sentinel mecha left now. But then the Black Arrow Corps moved out. Under the fierce assault of the armored units, the Alliance of Kings was soundly defeated. If they hadn't retreated quickly, even that Night Titan would have been left behind. The army of Perbuff gave the people of Hagian Star a bit of a shock from the Alliance. Chapter 540. But even at this stage, it was only a matter of repelling one attack from the enemy, far from enough to make those kings submit. They didn't have the guts to reassemble their troops and launch another large-scale attack on the Lumen Kingdom, so they could only opt for an economic blockade and minor border harassments to continue their hostilities. Of course, they certainly wouldn't be paying any imperial taxes to the Lumen Kingdom now. This was somewhat tricky for Guhang, but it was also within his expectations. With Nesluman insisting on not giving up the governorship of Hagian Star, the reactions of the other nations there were predictable. This matter was bound to end in war. Guhang harbored aspirations to annex the entire Hagian Star, and the other kingdoms, not made of mud, would naturally resist. This situation was less an accident than a result fostered by Guhang himself. He had long been prepared for a war. Especially now that the conflict within Rage Owl Star had almost completely subsided, the alliance had sufficient strength to cope with this war. And Gu Heng was confident enough to win it. Hajian Star had a population of 400 million, and counting the new immigrants, Rage Owl Star had just 55 million, a seemingly huge disparity in scale, but in reality, not so much. The gap in industrial capacity and mobilization ability between the two was too large. The main military forces of the kingdoms on Hajian Star, namely the kingdom armies, were at best militiamen in terms of quality, and differed greatly from the alliance's regular forces in all aspects. Not to mention organization, discipline, and tactics, just their hardware equipment alone was lacking, with many not even equipped with the G-series rifles. Much of their armament was self-produced crude guns and cannons with range, power, and accuracy all being serious concerns. The only equipment that could be considered cutting-edge and deserving of the Alliance's military's respect were the sentry mechas and night titans. However, the former performed only average in head-to-head battles, while the latter were too few in number. What made things even worse was that the high-tech equipment of those kingdom armies relied entirely on foreign trade, and this trade was facilitated by the Gu commercial firm. This made their sustained war-fighting capability very weak. Once a war broke out and the Gu commercial firm blocked trade routes, their military would soon crumble over time. However, despite Gu Heng feeling very confident in winning the war, and possibly even sustaining minimal losses, he also faced his own dilemma. The pretext for war. Certainly, he could use Lumen's name to declare all the other kingdoms on Hajian Star as rebels for not paying the imperial tax, and then appeal to the Rage Bear Legion, a Star Realm army unit, for assistance in quelling the rebellion. The Alliance army, under the guise of responding to the Star Realm army's call, could then head to Hajian Star in large numbers to carry out the suppression mission. This whole rationale was smooth and by the book. But it was a bit too shameless and forced. After all, a governor's ruling right was guaranteed by the empire, but beneath that were local bureaucratic squabbles. Forms like the King's Council, which nominated the governors, received empire's support depending on the political climate of each planet. The King's Council of Hajian Star was also registered and recognized by the empire government. Moreover, for thousands of years, Hajian Star had operated under such a political system. No matter under what pretense Gu Heng acted, others were not blind or foolish. How could they not see that he was engaging in annexation? If it were the past, Gu Heng would not have dared to do this. While the Star Sea was a world where the strong prey upon the weak, under the human race, under the unified government of the empire, such actions would draw too much criticism, and it would be exceedingly easy for him to be interfered with by other political forces at some step along the way and fail under external meddling. Moreover, even if successful, there would be a lot of difficult post-war work to do, and a bad job could mean throwing up as much as had been swallowed. After all, Gu Heng still needed to operate within the system of the empire. The main reason he could act now was that the political landscape of the entire Tianma Star sector had become thoroughly chaotic, which allowed Gu Heng to seize the opportunity. Furthermore, due to the political turmoil, things that previously required a lot of interest trading and political compromise to accomplish had now become relatively easy to obtain. Gu Heng, in the name of the Gu family, issued a notice to the two major powers within the Star sector, stating his intention to quell the rebellion on Hajian Star. This was almost a clear declaration that Gu Heng intended to annex Hajian Star. And for these two major forces, there was one central issue revolving around Gu Heng that they had been vying for beforehand. That pertained to the issue of the Iron Man rebellion on Rage Owl Star, involving assets controlled by the Fatches family at Blackbird Heavy Industries. When the Fatches family initially sent the Star Realm army to quell the Iron Man rebellion on Rage Owl Star, General Cai Minjin received the mission to storm Blackbird City first, gather related clues, and then destroy them. For them, it was a given. Indeed, the people of our Fatches family have caused you trouble, so now I have dispatched 1,000,000 Star Realm troops to solve this problem for you, we should then be even. But obviously, what really matters is the specific method used. Cai Minjin couldn't make it into Blackbird City first, and in the end, it was looted by the Alliance army. Fatches felt guilty, they didn't know what was there, Gu Heng hadn't said, but, isn't that fear? At this critical juncture, they certainly didn't want this thunder to explode. On the contrary, Pei Desi wanted Gu Heng to hand over this thunder to them, which would give them a weapon to attack the Fatches family. Not to say how lethal, but associating the Iron Man rebellion, originally deemed an individual act, with the entire Fatches family would evidently cause them a great deal of trouble. And here, Gu Heng thus had the capital to exchange with both parties. Hajian Star was originally just a marginal small place, with a population of 400 million, not even half as many as Karolia's nest capital. It had no rich special products, just an agricultural planet under feudalism. It really wasn't critical. Moreover, Gu Heng wanted it for himself. He was to take it himself, without any special help from others. He just needed their nod of approval. So, after some exchanges, Fatches eventually agreed not to trouble Gu Heng over this matter. As long as he could stabilize the situation on Hajian Star before the next imperial tax payment, they would consider the matter settled. After receiving a satisfactory response, Gu Heng quickly reassured them. I definitely won't give Blackbird Heavy Industries information to pay Desi as a weapon to attack Fatches. I definitely won't hand over Blackbird Heavy Industries information to Fatches, to let them be completely without worries. Then Gu Heng also gave Pei Desi a reassurance on his side. Gu Heng heard that Pei Desi was furious about this. He had already been angry about the betrayal of the Gu family and Fufana, and now, Gu Heng hadn't fully met his demands, hadn't handed over the goods to him, and was certainly not going to come forward to identify the Fatches family. But after all, Gu Heng hadn't completely flipped to the other side. After repeated persuasion by staff and other cooperative forces, based on the principle that even if the support of the Gu family couldn't be garnered, at least relations shouldn't become hostile, they finally nodded in agreement, their attitude roughly the same as Fatches. They wouldn't help, but they wouldn't cause trouble either. That was enough. Having resolved the political issues, Gu Heng could finally get down to business. The Central Group Army, half of the Rage Bear Legion on Rage Owl Star, the Phoenix Battle Group. The combat forces that Gu Heng confirmed began to get ready to set out. They were to board the transport ships summoned by the Gu commercial firm, embarking from the Rage Owl Star port, which had already expanded many times over, and head to Hajian Star, taking the first step in the Alliance's conquest of the Star Sea. In this war, Gu Heng would participate personally. 4K. There's one more chapter, but it will be very late, probably around 4 o'clock. Chapter 541. In the palace of the Kingdom of Stefano, as sturdy as a fortress, on Hajian Star, it was a hive of activity. Today marked the 42nd day since the invasion of the Kingdom of Stefano. 2 months ago, the armies of the Alliance descended upon this world, causing nearly all the nations on Hajian Star to tense up. Even without access to a starport, the Rage Owl Star people relied on ground rail transport ships and landing craft to continuously transport troops, equipment, and supplies to the surface. The spies stationed in the Lumen Kingdom by various nations became noticeably more active. They were investigating the specifics of the army that had landed on the planet, trying to understand their objectives, their military strength, and the state of their weapons and equipment. However, before they could figure anything out, the war operations of the Alliance Army had already begun. In the morning of the first day, Ness Lumen delivered a global address, with the signal openly accessible, shamelessly claiming the identity of the governor of Hajian Star, denying the legitimacy of the King's Council, and presenting documents from the Star Sector government to declare all nations that resisted taxes as imperial traitors, claiming that a Star Realm army had arrived at Hajian Star to quell the rebellion. By midday, urgent intelligence came out from within the borders of the Lumen Kingdom, indicating the massing of troops suspected to be heading towards the Kingdom of Stefano. By evening, the border defenses of the Kingdom of Stefano had been crushed into dust by the Alliance's Lion tanks. This series of news arrived extremely swiftly and frequently. One report had just detailed the kingdom's soldiers making a desperate stand at the border, estimating they could hold back the enemy for 10 hours and hoping for reinforcements soon, when the Minister of the Military was already fervently debating from where to dispatch troops and how to arrange the entire defense line to block the enemy. But before they could come to a conclusion, the next message announced that the defense line had been breached. This presented them with tremendous difficulties. The plans of the entire day seemed to be in vain. Often before a discussion could conclude or a plan could take shape, the basis for its feasibility no longer existed. This scenario repeated over the course of 42 days. The military operations of the Alliance were akin to a blitzkrieg. The kingdom's defenses were like butter to a hot knife, easily pierced. After the border, one defense line after another barely formed. Some still in the process of being built were overwhelmed by the Rage Owl Star people's armed forces with artillery and armor. As of today, the latest news indicated that the enemy's vanguard had reached a distance of 330 kilometers outside the fortress capital of the Kingdom of Stefano. In front of the capital, only 2 lines of defense remained. Within the court, a mood of tension, bewilderment, and even a bit of despair was spreading everywhere. Those generals and ministers, who under normal circumstances were either graceful or steadfast, were still trying hard to maintain their dignity and calmness. However, as monarch, Queen Isabel could discern that her ministers and generals were in utter disarray, incapable of producing a coherent idea. Honestly, she felt the same way. But at the same time, she also harbored deep anger. The kingdom of Stefano, the second largest kingdom on Hagian Star, had a population of 70 million people, ranking one above its neighbor, the Lumen Kingdom, and nearly double its size in both population and land area. Stefano was the most powerful among all the neighboring countries of Lumen Kingdom and a force to be reckoned with on the planet. Furthermore, Stefano had a strong military tradition. The nation had always prided itself on its military might, with the prevailing martial culture from top to bottom. The Stephanians were renowned throughout the world for their bravery and skill in battle. Even the capital of the country was a huge fortress, the court within it was also a castle with maximum defensive capabilities. Although Queen Isabel was a woman, she always took pride in her ancestors' bravery. Ascending to the throne at 19 and now 35, she had upheld the will of her ancestors during these 16 years. From initially being seen as nothing more than a transitional monarch, she had become a true queen. All across the kingdom, who did not submit to the rule of the Iron Curtain Queen? Who dared to overlook the queen, who at a little over 20 years old, had won the affection of the Imperial Guard, daring to stage a coup in the court and personally executing 15 powerful nobles with her own hands? She ruled this country with an iron fist and was not about to watch her most important ministers, one by one, become so panic-stricken and clueless. She knew well that this was the time for her to step forward. Tapping lightly on the table, the ministers and generals seated below in the military conference fell silent and raised their heads, looking towards their queen. The once youthful face of Isabel now appeared even more hardened. She made the decision, stop discussing those worthless things. We have already concentrated most of our forces. Over 200,000 warriors are ready to hold their ground in the capital fortress. At the same time, across the country, more than 500,000 warriors are converging towards the capital, and they only need a month to gather. After another month, we can expect a further 500,000 troops. Our allies have promised that within a maximum of 2 months, an alliance army of no less than 500,000 men, organized by the King's Council, will come to our aid. Chapter 542. We will prepare for the worst, and we shall fight a desperate battle with the enemy in our capital, our heart. We have a defensive line that spans 330 kilometers, a capital fortress manned by 200,000 people, and the million-strong army that is soon to come from our allied forces. I will ensure that those alien invaders crash and bleed against the fortress that Stephanians have built with their flesh and blood. No matter how powerful the alien invaders are, no matter how advanced their weaponry, we will make them witness the valor of the Stephanians. In the name of the Queen, I swear that I will fight alongside my subjects to defend this nation, and we will not take a single step back. I believe that we will ultimately achieve a complete victory in this war. Under the Iron Curtain Queen's speech, generals and ministers shouted and raised their arms in cheer. Their morale was boosted, they trusted their queen, and they were willing to shed their last drop of blood for Her Majesty. However, just at that moment, a muffled sound penetrated the shouting of the officials, unclear but still firm enough to reach everyone's ears. The cheers and applause gradually ceased, followed by more and more frequent muffled sounds that kept coming, seemingly getting closer and closer. Many thought it sounded like gunfire. But they also found the idea too incredible, under the Iron Curtain of the Queen, who would dare to fire a gun inside the Stefano fortress? As for that more terrifying possibility, no one wanted to believe it was real. Logically, how could the Alliance army, which was still 300 kilometers away this morning, possibly have come so close in the afternoon, past the defensive line of 100,000 soldiers, past the strong fortress defended by 200,000, that their gunfire could be heard by these individuals? Were divine troops descending from the sky? Even if there really were such divine troops descending, they would be shot down. The Stefano fortress had a complete orbital defense system. No matter whether it was airdrops from planes or orbital drops, it would not be so easy to break in. So, what was really happening? At this moment, the Iron Curtain Queen's face really was as stern as iron. Without her needing to give an order, the close-attending military officer had already rushed out to find out what exactly had happened. However, barely a minute or two later, the military officer who had left came back. Isabel's close-attending officers, all of whom were promising young elites, were born into military families with solid military training. The Iron Curtain Queen established the position of close-attending officers to gather these young talents, to develop their abilities, their loyalty, and to facilitate their future deployment to various armies, replacing the queen in controlling the military power of the kingdom. They were supposed to maintain a poker face in all situations. But when truly facing a catastrophe, how many people who prided themselves on their composure could actually remain calm? The returning officer looked panicked, his steps frantic. He said, "Your Majesty, the enemy has breached the fortress." This officer's father, a general of the kingdom, was present. He couldn't stand the sight and stood up, scolding, "What's with the panic? It's probably just a small group of infiltrators." Yet, the officer defiantly retorted, "It is indeed a small group, but they are interstellar warriors." Now, there was a real silence. Interstellar warriors? The ones known as the Emperor's Death Angels? They remembered the intelligence. About 2 years ago, during the turmoil initiated by the Lumen Kingdom against the Gu family, the forces that had beaten up the Lumen military indeed included the appearance of interstellar warriors. Even though many thinkers within the kingdom concluded from their limited understanding of the interstellar warriors that this unexpectedly powerful force was only invited occasionally to deal with Lumen Kingdom affairs. Given the rarity of the interstellar warriors, it was unlikely they could be recruited repeatedly by a single power. But, adhering to the spirit of expecting the worst in every plan and preparing for it as comprehensively as possible, they still included the extraordinary force of the interstellar warriors in their defense planning. The kingdom's military thinkers racked their brains with the limited intelligence they had, estimating the combat capabilities of the interstellar warriors, and conceived many ways to deal with these super soldiers. But now, the frontline battlefield hasn't even encountered those angels of the Emperor, yet the capital, which should have been extraordinarily safe, has been struck first? How is that possible? Even if they are interstellar warriors, how did they get in? In the midst of silence, that military officer couldn't help himself. He spoke up again, "I saw the surveillance, those red-armored giants wiping out the stationed knights as if there was no difference between them and the unarmed civilians they slaughter. The royal knights couldn't stop their advance at all. Your Majesty the Queen, generals, ministers, you must retreat now while you still can." "Shut up!" The general, who was the officer's father, spoke out once again. He was worried his son might anger the Iron Curtain Queen. Just moments before, Her Majesty the Queen had proclaimed before all the ministers that she would live and die with her subjects, and fight to the end against the enemy, without retreating. And now his boy was clamoring for people to run? Do you have a death wish? Doesn't Her Majesty still care about her dignity? With some concern, he glanced towards the head of the table, only to see Her Majesty the Queen, pale with anger, wordlessly turning and walking away. Anat put down the bomb gun in his hands, still smoking from the barrel, watching as the last sentry mecha, painted orange-red, fell before him. Although he had only been an interstellar warrior for 2 years, he was already accustomed to battle. His gaze shifted to a middle-aged woman in military attire, trembling but holding a pistol, trying hard to stay calm, and the group of people following her. Inside his helmet, he whispered in a volume that couldn't be heard outside, "Group A has cleared all enemies, target captured, confirmed as the Queen of the Kingdom of Stefano, Isabel." He didn't think he had said anything wrong. Even though the Queen was holding a gun and a few young officers nearby, and those so-called generals and ministers at the back were also holding self-defense weapons, in his eyes, there was indeed no danger anymore. New orders came through the built-in communication system of his helmet: "Take all targets to the rendezvous point, try to ensure they do not die." "Understood." After acknowledging the order, he looked up at the local dignitaries in front of him and said, "You have been captured. Now, please follow me and do not attempt any form of resistance." Behind him, 5 other warriors slowly stepped forward, using their gun barrels to direct the captives back the way they came. Anat himself walked directly towards the Queen. A young officer, mustering his courage, stepped in front of him, opening his mouth as if to say something, but Anat just waved his hand, the iron backhand striking his face and taking his head off. Anat's stride didn't falter as he came up to the Queen, "Isabel." He spoke her name flatly, without any superfluous words, but the barrel of his gun adequately conveyed his intent. The Iron Curtain Queen clenched her teeth but could only stagger along in the direction indicated by the barrel of the gun, totally powerless. They returned to the conference hall where the military meeting had begun. 6 red-armored giants guarded all the entrances and exits. Anyone who dared to come in or tried to sneak out would be turned to dust and smoke under their bomb guns. Inside, including the Iron Curtain Queen herself, more than 20 people hadn't even been disarmed. Nonetheless, they couldn't even think about resisting. They didn't even dare to speak. It was in this way, as they occasionally heard the sounds of gunfire, that they spent half an hour until they saw 2 more squads of interstellar warriors walk in. All anti-air systems have been shut down. In 1 hour, the special forces of the 10th Brigade will be airdropped here. To take control of the entire fortress region, we have to ensure that when the main corps arrives 2 days from now, this city will be without obstructions. We guarantee to complete the mission. Chapter 543. The 31st. Anat pulled the blood-stained chainsaw sword from the chest of the fallen sentry mecha before him, while his other hand, holding a bomb gun, fired non-stop, blasting Stephanians who tried to threaten him into pieces. Seconds later, the magazine was empty. It was his last one, and there were still many enemies. But he felt no panic. The chainsaw sword swung into action as his other fist clenched, becoming as heavy as a sledgehammer. Those grazed by the chainsaw sword would find their bodies torn apart, blood and flesh flying everywhere. Under the chainsaw sword capable of tearing through steel plates, the human body was frantically fragile, the interstellar warrior's fist was just as lethal. Even without the gravity gauntlets or similar devices, just the strength of an interstellar warrior, combined with the output of the powered armor, meant that the iron gloves could completely pulverize any part of the human body they struck. Anyone who tried to obstruct him, anyone who dared to get close, was ruthlessly eliminated. Soon, Anat was drenched in blood, which wasn't so noticeable only because it splashed over his fiery red battle armor. However, he didn't attempt to kill all the enemies with his ammo depleted, instead, he chose to break through to the rear. The enemy was numerous, but few dared to block his way. The death of the knight had a significant impact on the remaining soldiers' will to fight. This was precisely Anat's purpose in taking the initiative to strike. He wanted to take down the sentry mecha with one thrust, destroying this small group of enemies' will to resist. Once he succeeded, it was time to retreat. Even though his bomb gun was out of ammo, the retreat wasn't difficult. As the remaining enemies were only ordinary soldiers. Those with low morale had already collapsed, fleeing in disarray. Those with more courage dared only fire a few shots from a distance. Not to say whether they could hit their mark, but even if they did, the LR series laser guns, standard issue weapons in the hands of the Royal Guards, were ineffective against the powered armor. Everybody knows what happens with a flashlight. Of course, that's a joke. The LR series laser guns are much more powerful than the G series projectile weapons. Anat cherished the armor he wore dearly. Damaged armor could take a long time to repair, and currently, the Phoenixes didn't have the luxury of providing each of their ranks a spare set. He was not keen on getting hit by those flashlights too much, as the surface coating could be melted off, and severe metal fatigue could lead to armor damage. He dodged bullets, casually killing enemies that came close, and quickly retreated to his own line of defense. 2 brothers in arms guarding the already blasted gate, using the ruins of buildings for cover, nodded slightly to him. He nodded back briefly and then saw an old veteran commander behind them, to whom he reported mission completion and refilled some bullets from the nearby ammo box. Glancing briefly, he saw that the bullets remaining in the ammo box were already scarce. Before long, everyone would run out of bullets. This was indeed the predicament they were currently facing. Before this, his group, after intercepting the Iron Curtain Queen Isabel and her entourage, didn't retreat with the captives but instead returned to the heart of the kingdom of Stefano. This clearly was a perilous move. They hadn't fully taken over the city yet. Here, 200,000 Stephanian troops were still holding their ground. With their queen captured within the palace, the reaction the Stephanians would have was all too predictable. For whatever purpose, they would mobilize all their efforts and assemble all forces to take back their queen. This was also the goal of the interstellar warriors, to use the queen as powerful bait, holding the enemy firmly in place. After converging with 2 squads that had completed the destruction of the anti-air systems, Anat and his comrades, a total of 20 phoenixes, stood guard at the center of the kingdom, beginning a confrontation, more accurately, a one-sided slaughter against the countless enemies coming to rescue the queen. Isabel's so-called brave Stephanians indeed weren't just hot air. The so-called knights, the kingdom's nobles who piloted the sentry mechas, along with a large number of royal guards, charged forward with abandon, striving to break through the pathways guarded by the interstellar warriors to rescue their queen. But they achieved nothing. In this not very lengthy period, the 20 interstellar warriors annihilated 30 sentry mechas and killed more than 2,000 royal guards. Mecha debris and warrior blood stained every area red, with limbs and metal wreckage strewn all about. And the interstellar warriors were unscathed. Even the valiant Stephanians couldn't help but feel their morale sink in the face of such desperate disparity. They had tried everything and sacrificed without reservation, yet they still saw no glimmer of hope for breaching the defense line formed by the 20 phoenixes. Yet they kept striving. After enough sacrifices and lessons learned, the knights and Stephanian soldiers who followed didn't blindly charge forward anymore. They kept shouting, instructing the ordinary soldiers to carry their weapons and cover a few individuals carrying high explosives, rushing towards the interstellar warriors. They gambled on luck and bet that the interstellar warriors also had limited ammo. Chapter 544. Indeed, that was the case. The interstellar warriors' ability to carry heavy loads was exceptionally strong, and their tactically designed backpacks made full use of every inch of space, so they could bring as many supplies as possible. However, the size of the bombs was there to see, much larger than ordinary bullets, so the quantity that could be loaded was ultimately limited. Each phoenix had taken at least 600 bombs, but after the previous battle and fighting here for a long time, they were finally running low. They had already started to consciously conserve ammunition in battle, but even interstellar warriors couldn't be forced to kill an enemy with every shot. Necessary fire suppression, reconnaissance by fire, and long-range shooting mishaps were all normal circumstances. Not to mention, even if they could manage to kill an enemy with each bullet, the number of enemies was still greater than their ammunition. Facing the new enemy's defensive tactics, Anat volunteered, seizing the lull after one wave of enemy offensive to break out alone. He circumvented their line of sight and, under fire, once the enemy became aware of him, used his chainsaw sword to eliminate the command sentry mecha hiding behind. After accomplishing his objective, he indeed achieved his purpose. No matter how brave the Stephanians were, it couldn't conceal the fact that this was a feudal army at its core. After the loss of the noble officers, the remaining common soldiers were clearly bewildered and hesitated. At that moment, Phoenix's defensive line was finally able to breathe a little. They shouldn't have to be so tense until the next batch of enemies reorganized, and the consumption of ammunition could be slightly eased. As for what came after, the bullets would eventually run out. But what of it? Anat checked the panel built into his tactical helmet. There were only around 10 minutes left to the scheduled time. At this moment, above the capital fortress of Stefano, there were consecutive howling sounds. Over 100 Wind Falcon fighters had arrived in the skies above the city. Previously, the Wind Falcon dared not come. Conventional anti-air firepower was one thing, a mere formality. With an elevation in flight altitude and maintaining speed, dropping bombs would generally not be a problem. After all, the local forces of Hagian Star were downright pathetic in terms of air force construction. Although they also possessed Wind Falcons, a kingdom had no more than a dozen, hardly daring to fly out for a fight. However, they had spent a lot of money to build an orbital defense system. The Defender Real Ammunition Air Defense System, along with many precision anti-air missiles, could guarantee a certain interception efficiency even against starship-to-ground bombardment, let alone dare the Air Force to fly over the city's airspace. But now, the interstellar warriors' raid had already destroyed the city's defense control system. The Wind Falcons could swagger over. They brazenly circled at the very top of the court fortress. The first to unload soldiers and ammunition materials went down. The rest bombarded any potential targets that could threaten the airborne operations with all their onboard missiles, even lowering their altitude for dive shooting. When the Wind Falcons that finished unloading flew up to take over their duties, the remaining ones continued to unload personnel and supplies. After rotating in this fashion for 4 or 5 rounds, all the equipment had been unloaded. The entire process went smoothly. Interstellar warriors did their jobs reliably. It wasn't just about anti-air gunfire coming at them. The areas around with potential threats had been cleared, with hardly a few common soldiers seen firing rifles into the sky. After using up their missiles and machine gun rounds, the Wind Falcons departed, satisfied. What they left behind were over 1,000 exoskeleton-equipped special forces of the 10th Brigade and enough ammunition for them to fight intensely for an entire day. After the Wind Falcons went back, they would load up another batch of warriors and supplies and make another trip. Counting load times and travel, the next arrival would not exceed 8 hours at most. On the ground, the 3 Special Forces battalion commanders of the freshly landed 10th Brigade, 3 majors, gathered before Matins. They, clad in exoskeletons, saluted with awe. The towering battle group leader donned in the Terminator power armor before them with an Alliance Army salute. After returning the salute, Matins began to assign tasks without any idle chatter. Soon, each of the units took their personnel and dispersed in all directions. Matins gazed at the entire city. Hasty and chaotic, flames of war spread everywhere. He was all too familiar with this scene. For the past several centuries, this was how he had lived. Interstellar warriors indeed always dealt with all sorts of formidable enemies resembling monsters and evil spirits, who were the most memorable. But digging a little deeper into memory, those routine rebellion suppression missions against laughably weak foes were actually the most frequent battles. Sometimes he didn't understand. Even when his battle group, at its peak or later during the redemption expeditions, had been split into dozens of groups of a few dozen men, operating on the scale of companies, constantly on the move in the Star Sea, responding to support requests from planetary governors and the imperial military at the far corners of space, most of the battles were about helping planets suppress rebellions. They truly did not have much time to rest, yet planetary governors always complained that requesting imperial reinforcements, especially interstellar warrior support, was something unattainable. By the time reinforcements might arrive, the conflict had already cooled down. This contradiction often perplexed Maddens. He always felt that as the Emperor's death angels, as the imperial military's most formidable warriors, their enemies should be those aliens, demons, the great adversaries of mankind. Yet most of the time, their opponents were just humans, continually suppressing rebellions, over and over again. Of course, he knew it was because the Empire's territories were so vast that, even though the battle groups were running themselves ragged everywhere, they could only quiet one rebellion at a time. But what he truly did not understand was why there were rebellions everywhere. Even more so, why did rebellions they had just quelled sometimes resurface after a few years? He had a long life, but his life had always been filled with battles, hardly providing him enough time to ponder this question. But now, it seemed another person had come to contemplate this question in his stead. On the Rage Owl Star, he had not only witnessed but also participated in Governor Gu Hang's unification of the world. He was initially indifferent, for he had assisted too many worlds to achieve unification and suppress rebellions. However, he rarely saw that when so-called unification truly arrived, every single person, every group that had come under Governor Gu Hang's rule, significantly began to live a better life than before. The evildoers also truly received their punishment. He knew the state Rage Owl Star was in when Gu Hang first arrived, so he felt even more that everything they had done appeared to have real value. At least, he saw no signs whatsoever of a large-scale rebellion arising on Rage Owl Star. This scenario was also somewhat confirmed on the Hagian Star. The Lumen Kingdom, after its conquest, also quickly settled down. Though its development wasn't notably spectacular due to not being native and not having changed its political system completely, one no longer saw people dying of hunger or freezing to death. Maddens knew he wasn't particularly astute politically, but with his shallow understanding, he believed the Lumen people wouldn't rebel anymore. The governor he had sworn allegiance to, seemed to have a more comprehensive thought process and an exact method to why people rebel and how to eradicate rebellions compared to himself, a warrior who only knew how to fight. Let's just wait and see. He had to admit that after he had sworn allegiance to Gu Hang, although the battle group was flourishing and showing signs of revival, there was a sense of shame in his heart that I once pledged loyalty to grand causes like the Emperor, the Empire, and humanity, but now it has become loyalty to one person. How shameful. Sometimes, he even asked himself if it was worth sacrificing the battle group's honor for the sake of its continuation. And now, those inappropriate feelings of shame were gradually waning with what he was seeing and hearing. Then let me wait and see. He said softly, hoisted his gun, and advanced toward the battlefield before him. Chapter 545. The Special Forces elites of the 10th Brigade didn't have the same terrifying battlefield dominance as the interstellar warriors. Despite the armor plates welded onto their exoskeletons providing protection for their vital torso areas, they weren't enough to completely ignore enemy gunfire, let alone the significant number of laser weapons in the hands of the elite honor guard of the Kingdom of Stefano. Their offensive tactics, relying on laser guns and electromagnetic rifles, could easily destroy ordinary soldiers, but when facing the few-century mecha, they too lacked effective means. Only their most elite, trained to T2 level, holding anti-tank rifles could pose a conventional threat to those knights. Other special forces elites needed to either get close with chainsaw swords or plant bombs, or otherwise hope to have anti-armor rockets or mortars at hand. But the good news was that, thanks to the extra power provided by the exoskeletons, they could carry a variety of heavy individual weapons, much more powerful than ordinary infantry. Compared to the interstellar warriors, their biggest advantage was in their numbers. After Anat and the other 20 interstellar warriors drew most of the enemy's attention, using the Iron Curtain Queen as an irresistible bait for the Stephanians, Maddens led another 20 men smoothly shutting down the rest of the fortress's air defenses, and even cleared a space suitable for Wind Falcon fighters to drop soldiers and supplies on the upper part of the fortress. This airdrop brought down 1,000 Special Forces elites, a number 50 times that of the Interstellar Warriors. Moreover, the Phoenixes hadn't retreated, they would also join the battle. After handing over the task of guarding the fortress and watching over the high-ranking Stefano prisoners to a Special Forces company, 40 Interstellar Warriors formed squads and led a large number of Special Forces elites to commence operations. The battle lasted for almost 2 days. Maddens, as the commander-in-chief, basically accomplished the mission of leading the troops to seize the entire fortress. The Stephanians were truly fighting bravely, but their subjective valor couldn't make up for the gap in actual strength between the two sides. Not to mention, could it be that these elite warriors of the Alliance were weak in their combat will? Impossible. And indeed, it was because of their relentless fighting will, enduring heavy casualties, accepting seemingly suicidal missions, that they died so quickly. The Stephanian honor guard was almost completely annihilated. 50 sentry mecha and over 8,000 elite soldiers, virtually the kingdom's most elite force. The Iron Curtain Queen saw all this with her own eyes, her heart bleeding. No one knew better than her how much effort she spent over the years of her reign to build such an honor guard. Their existence was not merely to defend the fortress, she had larger ambitions, and this honor guard was the backbone of her future plans. But now, all was lost. Was she a feudal monarch? No. But when her enemies were extraterrestrial visitors, the unbeatable interstellar warriors and the Alliance army, she, bound by her own limitations, found herself utterly powerless. After the most elite honor guard of the Kingdom of Stefano was decimated, the battle temporarily subsided. The forces of the Alliance held their position within the fortress, with no immediate intentions of advancing outward. Despite 3 more waves of Wind Falcons bringing 1,000 more Special Forces elites, along with a battalion and an artillery company from the 31st Airborne Division, boosting the Alliance's total military presence to around 4,000, Maddens, as the commanding general, did not deploy troops beyond the fortress. Inside this capital city, there were still 200,000 Stephanian soldiers. These royal forces were far from as powerful as the decimated honor guard, but they were still numerous and possessed over 100 sentry mecha, as well as 2 Night Titans. Yet this main force of 200,000 didn't launch another massive assault on the fortress. It wasn't that they had some other purpose in mind, mainly, they were shell-shocked. Nearly all the kingdom's high command had been captured, many honor guard officers had died in the previous 2 days of battle. Among the survivors, it was difficult to find a suitable candidate to lead the troops. They even summoned a retired general back to service. The chaos within the army needed sorting out, and the next steps required more profound planning. Moreover, they weren't completely inactive. They also tried to muster forces to retake the fortress. But it was clear they couldn't. The 200,000 forces, initially not stationed within the city, were far inferior in quality to the honor guard defending the fortress. After several failed attacks, they had suffered significant losses. Although their casualty rate was nowhere near that of the almost annihilated honor guard, the participating units showed a marked tendency toward combat hesitance and reticence. Despite some zealous and loyal officers urging the troops to attack repeatedly, the results were very poor. This caused the conflict around the fortress to generally calm down, with only some low-intensity fighting in localized areas. Chapter 546. Not having to fight is a good thing. Madden simply had his troops wait patiently, and eventually, they received the news he wanted. The main forces of the Alliance had once again broken through the enemy's defensive line. The main forces, originally 300 kilometers away, had advanced to just over 100 kilometers. And the fastest vanguard units had even reached a position less than 70 kilometers from Stefano capital city. It was the 5th day since the Interstellar Warriors had started their raiding operations, and everything was going according to plan. Now it was time for them to make their next move. Maddens found 2 people. One of them was named Henrik Larsson. He was one of the first group of fresh blood for the Phoenix. Before this, there was nothing distinguishing him from the others, and he didn't have standout performances like Anat. But now, he was the sole think tank member of the battle group. The other person Maddens sought was named Dani Dress. She was a member of the Alliance's Storm Mage Corps. This organization had been established less than 3 months ago, originating from the Storm Mage Academy that had been established 6 months prior, along with the Rage Owl Star branch of the Imperial Psychic Association. The Storm Mage Academy, in half a year's time, had screened out about 100 individuals with spiritual energy talent throughout the Rage Owl Star. excluding those who were older and whose spiritual energy talent was indeed insufficient to pose a threat to others, which were just registered. The remaining under 35 years of age totaled over 70 people, who, after registering their information, were sent to the Mage Academy to study control of their spiritual power. Out of them, 50 had already graduated. While being members of the psychic associations, they were also all seconded by the Alliance government to form the Storm Mage Corps. At this moment, half of the Storm Mage Corps was here. The temporary leader of more than 20 Storm Mages was Danny Dress. Dress came from the northern border province of the Alliance and was only 17 years old. She started displaying superpowers the year before last, like making a pen disappear into thin air and reappear several meters away. She couldn't control this power herself. When she was intensely emotional or feeling particularly bad, her power would release, and everything around her could possibly teleport spontaneously. Her parents, though only poorly paid miners, loved their daughter enough. They hid Dress's talent well, didn't tell anyone, and asked Dress to control herself as much as possible. However, before the Alliance took control of the North Territory, the influence of the primordial Wrath Owl sect was too great there. They were also quite inclined to collect these individuals with spiritual energy talent. Under their special training, those who already had spiritual energy talent and then were infused with dark magic through secret rituals would obtain even more powerful abilities. Some of the high priests with great power in their sect had come into being this way. In the end, Dress was still captured by them. The cultists killed her parents before her eyes and took her away. What would follow was a series of long-term tortures combined with brainwashing techniques to twist her personality and memory, then infuse her with dark magic, in order to cultivate her into a saint of the sect. But fortunately, just as these methods had barely begun and hadn't yet caused irreversible severe damage to Dress, the Alliance completely destroyed the cult, and Dress was saved. What could the rescued Dress do to face the life that had actually been shattered? What else could be done but live on? She accepted the arrangement of the Alliance, received about half a year of basic education, then entered a mechanical factory in the North Territory to do logistics service. Subsequently, she was notified by the newly established Psychic Cultivators Association staff, who told her she had spiritual energy talent and had her register. At that time, her mood was very heavy, very afraid. The greatest disaster of her life originated from this. Wouldn't being discovered by the Alliance government scare her? After being rescued, she had been very careful in hiding her special abilities, especially as she grew older. She had learned to control her superpowers better. Although she didn't know how to use them actively, she could at least try to prevent them from appearing when she didn't want them to. So, she was very puzzled. How did the Alliance find out about this? With fear and some despair in her heart, she entered the Mage Academy. But the life here was totally different from what she had imagined and what she had experienced before. She moved into a bright room, could eat her fill, dress warmly, made some friends who were quite similar to herself, received a good education, and even had counselors paying attention to their inner feelings and psychological health issues. What she needed to do was only to study various theories and learn how to control her special powers. Then, one day, suddenly, she felt enlightened and had thoroughly mastered the power. Although there was still a large body of theoretical knowledge she hadn't finished learning, she was already able to use her power as she wished. After that, she joined the Storm Mage Corps. It could be said to be voluntary because she didn't know where else she could go, and her classmates had also chosen to join. The pleasant life over the past few months had let her let down her guard, convinced that serving the Alliance wasn't a bad thing and could even enhance her rank. After entering the Mage Corps, she took on some tasks, such as helping in the factory with some special work, like sending a certain part into a sealed container, using spatial cutting abilities, helping to cut through some tough materials. Not busy, let alone painful. Her life was on the right track. In contrast to those small, unimportant tasks, her very first significant action turned out to be crossing the stars to another world, joining the interstellar warriors to fight side by side in a war. To be honest, she was still quite nervous. But in this battle, she, along with her colleagues who had come with her, didn't need to personally engage in frontline combat. The fighting was the warriors' responsibility, while she and her colleagues had another more important task. And now, Commander Maddens, as the Supreme Commander, once again issued her an order, asking her and the think tank member Larson of the battle group to repeat the process. My men are ready. Now, I need you to join forces again to initiate a psychic teleportation, sending my team to the heart of the enemy. No problem, we have all recovered and can perform a psychic teleportation again. Just like last time, we can teleport 50 people at a time. Excellent, proceed, then. You have 4 hours to prepare. That's more than enough, Dress stated confidently. She began to work with Henrik Larsson on how they would actually operate the task ahead. Psychic teleportation was a powerful thing, but it wasn't something that happened just by wishing for it. They needed to study the psychic and environmental conditions here and at the target location to ensure the teleportation wasn't interfered with and that the deviation wasn't too great. Researching the departure location was certainly easy, but studying the target location was quite inconvenient. If it were easily reachable, then what was the need for the complex teleportation tactics? All they could do was to use psychic vision and psionic perception to sense as much as possible. However, overall, the problem wasn't too big. Mainly because the target location wasn't far, probably about 30 kilometers away, visible with a telescope from a high vantage point. They were prepared rather quickly. At the departure location, on a large open-air platform, a deep blue psychic circle was already drawn. Dress, along with more than 20 psychics, stood around it. A series of thud, thud, thud footsteps sounded, as 40 interstellar warriors marched in step. Chapter 547. This was the second time Dress had seen the Phoenix's angels come marching in formation, armed with firearms and wearing blades. But the shock she felt was no different from the first time. The Phoenix warriors clad in heavy armor truly resembled red giants. Each of their tall and imposing figures conveyed their iron-willed determination to the surrounding people. Their coordinated actions combined the majesty of each individual warrior into an even more tumultuous and surging display of their murderous intent. Dress found herself involuntarily holding her breath until she was almost gasping for air, at which point she suddenly inhaled deeply. The oppressive feeling was overwhelmingly shocking. Focus a bit more. A gentle voice came from beside her. Dress turned her head and saw another red-armored warrior. Although he did not take off his helmet, Dress could feel that the interstellar warrior and spiritual energy wielder, Henrik Larsson, was smiling at her. She nodded slightly, sorry. No need to apologize, just wait for news of our victory. As the two conversed, the last footstep, like a thud, resounded, and the interstellar warriors all came to a halt. Maddens, walking at the forefront, said to her, "We are fully prepared." Good. Dress nodded slightly, as spiritual energy began to flow out of her. Following her, all the other spiritual energy wielders, including Henrik Larsson, did the same. The immense spiritual energy gathered on Dress, and through her, was channeled into the spiritual energy formation before her. Every azure thread of the formation began to light up. Moments later, the space above the formation started to violently tremble. We can enter now. Henrik Larsson sent out the message. Commander Maddens was the first to step into the formation, and all the other warriors quickly followed. Larsson did the same, standing by Maddens's side. The surging spiritual energy linked each of the brothers in arms together. Moments later, the figures of all the interstellar warriors vanished in an instant, leaving behind more than 20 spiritual energy wielders collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. According to what they learned at the Mage Academy, this was a state of spiritual energy overexertion, which of course is not good for either body or mind. But as long as it doesn't happen too frequently, just occasionally, and if one gets enough rest afterwards to recover, it wouldn't leave any lasting problems or hidden dangers. Dress was in relatively good condition compared to everyone else. Although she was the host of this spiritual energy teleportation, she also had the highest level of spiritual energy among them all. During the grading at the Psychic Cultivators Association, her spiritual energy strength was rated as Class C, on the same level as Tianma Star Sector Psychic Association's current president, Wang Yuyang. Her face pale and breathing lightly, she gazed beyond the fortress court, looking far away. It was too far for her to see clearly, but she knew that the interstellar warriors had already reached the outer city area of the enemy camp, which had been repurposed as a military base. If nothing unexpected occurred, they would directly face the enemy's strongest weapon, Night Titans. Dress wasn't too worried, she felt that the interstellar warriors couldn't possibly lose. In the instant after the teleportation was completed, the interstellar warriors indeed had to confront the enemy's most powerful weapon, the Night Titans, which was undeniably true and was actually happening. But such a confrontation was certainly not what the Night Titans would have wanted to see. It was too sudden and too unforeseeable. The Night Titans required pilots, and in the societal context of Hagian Star, Night Titans were all part of the noble families. They wouldn't always stay inside the uncomfortable and cramped cockpit. When not in battle, they would naturally rest outside. Such as right now. Of course, as the most powerful weapons, as extremely costly assets of war, the Stephanians were very protective of their Night Titans. A large number of soldiers were stationed around them, with over 10 mecha sentries on guard. The typical storage locations for the Night Titans were permanent semi-underground fortifications that could withstand sudden artillery shelling and aerial attacks, while tightly preventing infiltration. However, what the Stephanians could never have imagined was that right under their noses, in the air that was empty just a moment before, suddenly appeared 40 red-armored giants. Dumbfounded, the guards even forgot to shoot. Of course, even if they had opened fire, it would have been pointless. Upon landing, the interstellar warriors had clear roles. 10 men per group began charging toward the Stephano Kingdom army's only 2 Night Titans. The other 20 started systematically eliminating nearby enemies, with the primary targets being those sentry mechas, which, with their mounted cannons, could potentially damage the powered armor at the current combat range. But that was truly not difficult. There were only 10 sentry mechas, and they were also caught by surprise. The other rank-and-file soldiers could hardly be of any help. Under such circumstances, what else was there to say about the outcome? Chapter 548. They were all still in shock when, in a flash, each of them was splashed with more than 20 armor-piercing bombs. The entire army was annihilated. Immediately after, the sound of thermite bomb explosions echoed from 2 fortifications that housed Night Titans. Without a doubt, Night Titans with no pilots and energy shields deactivated, once rigged with 4 or 5 thermite bombs and detonated simultaneously, stood no chance of being repaired and were utterly destroyed. The mission of the Phoenix Battle Group had been thoroughly accomplished. The entire process had taken less than 6 minutes. Madden's expression bore not a hint of pride or anything of the sort. Just basic operations. Spiritual energy transportation, right into the enemy's face, and then slaying them all with a blade. What's so difficult about that? Not at all difficult. The only thing that might be considered somewhat difficult was how to retreat safely and unharmed. After all, they were now deep in enemy territory. Surrounding them were hundreds of thousands of Stephano Kingdom's troops. Not to say that they were invincible just because they were interstellar warriors wearing powered armor. That was not the case. Based on Madden's past experience, if they made any mistakes or were the least bit careless in their following actions, there could still be consequences. Heavy artillery, excessive gunfire, bombs, these things could all pose a threat to them. But the good news was that the enemy's setup here had been completely shattered. In the face of the sudden, monstrous losses, and with the Night Titans destroyed, the ordinary soldiers had no will to fight amidst the chaos. They retreated without much resistance and headed along the pre-planned route toward the palace fortress's defensive lines. After covering more than 20 kilometers, passing through the outer city district, they had successfully escaped danger. Prior to this, they had a thorough plan. The routes chosen were designed to progress through narrow areas that were not conducive to the use of heavy firepower. Moreover, their enemies were obviously unprepared for an attack from the rear. Lacking both checkpoints and the will to fight, they crumbled easily upon being struck. In the outer city district, the interstellar warriors moved as if strolling leisurely in a garden, facing almost no effective resistance. Additionally, they had an extra gain. During the retreat, one of the squads discovered an unusual military deployment around a building, suggesting the presence of a high-ranking figure. That building was on their evacuation route. Since it was on their way, they attempted to attack the location. The attack was, of course, successful, and as a result, they found the enemy's command center in there. A veteran general took the lead, and many officers of the Stephano Kingdom army were trapped inside. Several sentry mechas guarded them closely, covering as they boarded several military vehicles in an attempt to leave. But the bomb guns blew up all those vehicles. The enemy forces were thrown into sudden chaos, while the interstellar warriors did not linger and effortlessly left the scene. The actions of the interstellar warriors were not isolated. 2 hours before their spiritual energy teleportation, the Alliance army, occupying the central palace, had begun a multi-point, comprehensive, heavy firepower assault on the exterior at Madden's instigation. The main objective wasn't to seize any vital targets but to draw the enemy's attention and create opportunities for the interstellar warriors. At the same time, an entire battalion of special forces advanced outward along the route of the interstellar warriors' retreat to provide support for the Phoenix warriors. Although without these preparations, the Phoenixes would certainly still be able to successfully withdraw, yet when making the plan, one must always be prepared for the unexpected. The interstellar warriors who successfully withdrew, their achievements in this surprise attack were extremely glorious. The 200,000 troops of the Kingdom of Stefano stationed in the outer city area were instantly paralyzed and even lost control. With the main war weaponry gone and the recently recovered semblance of a command brain excised, countless soldiers witnessed the Emperor's angels cut through the entire district with an invincible stance. Everyone before them was like insects, easily killed. This made them lose their belief in victory. The organizational structure collapsed from the top down, and the morale of the ordinary soldiers crumbled. The chain reaction caused by all of this made the lower and middle-ranking officers completely unable to control their subordinates. Quite a few among them didn't want to control them at all since they themselves were breaking down. The army seemed to still exist but also seemed as if it had disappeared. Large numbers of deserters began to emerge among the soldiers, and those who did not flee were panicked and at a loss. Moreover, many vicious incidents began to occur in the city, with soldiers starting to rob residents, committing murder and arson. But all this came to a halt the next day. The main forces of the Alliance came. Belonging to the Alliance Central Corps, the 13th Armored Brigade and the 60th Armored Brigade converged and advanced in unison. Although there were only about 20,000 of them, when 200 self-propelled guns broke the main gates of Stefano and then thousands of armored vehicles, and over 100 Lion tanks, marched into the city in an imposing procession, when the Special Forces elites within the Central Palace District, the soldiers of the 31st Airborne Division, began to cut through from the palace, coordinating with the external armored forces to pinch and strike at those Stefano soldiers. All resistance henceforth crumbled. The Alliance's army, without dispute, gained control of the entire city. And after a brief consultation, the political commissars of the two armored brigades implemented a series of post-war policies. The whole urban area was first put under military administration, but multiple distribution points for essential goods were opened, ensuring basic humanitarian relief. They even temporarily mobilized some surrendering officials from Stefano's royal city to help with this task. About 200,000 people became prisoners of war. The Alliance swiftly began sifting through them. Most had no issues, but those who had committed crimes before the Alliance took full control of the city were picked out, publicly tried, and executed on the spot. All were handled strictly and severely. These strategies, swift and effective, pacified this feudal metropolis of 2 million inhabitants. "I want to see Mr. Gu," said Isabel. Standing in front of her was Madens. The battle group leader did not say much, just nodded slightly. And so, the Iron Curtain Queen Isabel boarded a Wind Falcon fighter bound for Pincer City. On the plane, Isabel, no longer young, seemed to recover the feeling she had when she first ascended the throne at 17. Nervousness, fear, confusion, these feelings were the greatest, even larger than back then. By comparison, while initially she held firmness, perseverance, forbearance, and a decisively resolute attitude when necessary, now they were woefully weak. She didn't feel she had become weaker, but the two situations were completely different. If the past was the battle for her throne, then now, she was facing a war for the very survival of her nation. And it was a war that had already been lost. During her captivity, she was not too strictly supervised, as such, in that limited freedom, she personally saw how her brave knights and soldiers went to their deaths courageously but meaninglessly. She also witnessed how the 20,000 strong forces outside the city, on whom she had pinned great hopes and who, in her previous fantasies, could at least hold off the Alliance army for over a month with the solid royal city, completely collapsed within a mere 2 or 3 days. Even though, the Kingdom of Stefano still had 1 million men in its remaining territories, what was the point now? She had fully realized that in this war that was deciding the kingdom's fate, they had already lost in reality. Stefano had fallen. But she was Stefano's queen, and she still had to make one last effort for the survival of the Kingdom of Stefano. Chapter 549. Isabel, in her youth, was renowned for her beauty, and now at 35, her youthful glow had faded, yet years as a queen had graced her with a different kind of allure. The sense of naivety had withdrawn, replaced by a majestic demeanor and a sovereign's authority, all of which were reflected in her. She donned her most exquisite, most ceremonious garments and put on her crown, just as she had for every grand ceremony in the kingdom, dressed to the nines. She walked leisurely through the foreign halls of Pincer City's palace, her head high and her chest out, overflowing with the aura of a queen. Seeing her in this state, many servants within the Pincer Palace couldn't help but gather and whisper among themselves. After their initial amazement at her presence, their thoughts surprisingly converged. Does this dethroned monarch really consider this place her court? Ha, how ridiculous! Mr. Gu will teach her a profound lesson. The servants spoke in hushed tones. They were but ordinary people, instinctively cautious not to offend, even in the face of a fallen queen, someone they could only look up to, even though her death seemed imminent. They could chat among themselves in secret, but they surely wouldn't dare to be overheard. But even if Isabel hadn't heard their whispers, she knew what those gossips were saying. It didn't matter. In a way, they hadn't exactly spoken untruths. Isabel's demeanor was indeed an invitation for Gu Hang to teach her a lesson. The prouder she acted as a queen now, the louder it would resound when she later lay prostrate before Gu Hang, her pride, dignity, and prestige all shattered. Once she loathed these things, but now she had to pick up what she despised, to use as her final weapon. She was led by a walking server to a small side hall. The wooden door opened to reveal a bright, albeit small, office ahead of her. Sunlight spilled in through the window onto a rather young and handsome man, seated behind a wooden desk, scribbling something. He looked up, glanced at the Iron Curtain Queen, and his eyes flickered ever so slightly. Indeed, her appearance had taken him aback. Such elegance was indeed rare to see. In the Alliance, such displays were not in fashion. All were dressed modestly from top to bottom, even in significant ceremonies, they would merely dress a bit more formally. In Corollia III, clothing was indeed more exquisite, but styled more modern, even post-modern to Gu Hang's view, which he found somewhat abstract. Isabel's garb, however, was different. Feudal and regal, with a complex and ornate aesthetic considered outdated in many worlds, was unexpectedly to Gu Hang's liking. Of course, he wouldn't be caught dead wearing it himself, nor would he promulgate such dress in his own government or economic systems. But he could still appreciate it when it did appear before him. Isabel sharply detected Gu Hang's gaze. She thrust her already full bosom forward a bit more firmly. But just then, Gu Hang withdrew his gaze. All he did was mildly say, "Isabel, right? You've arrived a bit earlier than scheduled, but please, take a seat for a while, I have some other matters at hand." What else could Isabel say? She had her schemes, yet she dared not truly defy the governor. She had to compose herself and took a seat nearby. It turned into a long wait. Her clothes might have been beautiful, but they were far from comfortable, and she maintained a strict posture to avoid wrinkling her attire. At least not by her own doing, not now. Throughout this time, she stole glances at Mr. Gu repeatedly. She even had a keen desire to peek at the documents on his desk, clearly of great importance. But she dared not make the slightest overstepping gesture. "Please relax a bit," came Gu Hang's gentle voice again, "there's no need to be so tense, nor so stiff. You might be waiting for quite a long stretch." "That's all right," the Queen responded subconsciously. Gu Hang didn't further concern himself with her. In fact, Gu Hang was well aware of Isabel's intentions. But he was utterly uninterested. He had no penchant for tearing apart someone's dignity, nor did he derive much pleasure from the feeling of conquest. His calculations were cold, driven by gains and losses, and the pursuit of his goals. It wasn't that he intentionally neglected Isabel, he indeed had matters of greater importance to attend to. His strategic considerations for Hagian Star were steadily advancing. Striking the kingdom of Stefano was a vital link. His forces were valiant and well equipped, but their numbers were problematic. Alliance soldiers, no matter how fierce, should not face foes 10 times their number in direct combat. If the battle turned into a lengthy war of attrition, it would be a nightmare. Against an enemy of 400 million and a whole planet's strategic depth, 35,000 troops in Gu Hang's charge couldn't hope to win. If warfare degenerated to such a state, Gu Hang would have to enact his contingency plans, abandoning the swift conquest of Hagian Star in favor of assimilating the local populace. But for now, that step wasn't necessary. He could still follow the primary plan, a lightning war to overwhelm the entire planet. He needed prompt, decisive battles, and through such victories, to swiftly tear down the resistance of the entire world. Chapter 550. The offensive against the kingdom of Stefano was an action guided by this thought. The conventional troops adopted blitzkrieg tactics, concentrating firepower and continually puncturing the enemy's line of defense with each armored brigade as the spearhead of their assault. The main force followed suit, and then another breakthrough would form. Whenever there was a chance, they would encircle and annihilate the enemy, if not, they would aim for a comprehensive rout, always prioritizing speed and marching towards the royal city. As the main force progressed to a certain extent, Gu Hang also played his trump card. His Storm Mage Corps. According to the general experience of the Imperial Psychic Association, they could, on average, discover one individual with spiritual energy talent among every 10 million people. But this was not the limit. Based on the judgment of the Psychic Cultivators Association, they believed that one person with genuine spiritual energy talent would be born per million people in a normal world. However, due to various reasons such as the local government policies, customs, traditions, and many empire worlds having the custom of witch hunting, this has led to the execution of many individuals with spiritual energy talent as soon as they showed any signs of it. In addition, because of these issues, many individuals with spiritual energy talent also attempt to conceal their uniqueness. When they grow older and their talent fades or becomes controllable, they blend into the populace or fail to hide it, go completely insane, and become a dangerous presence, in which case they are beyond help and must be dealt with. Even in places without such customs or traditions, identifying individuals with spiritual energy talent among ordinary people is difficult. The flow of information is a big issue. Without a developed media industry, spreading anything across a crowd of 1 million becomes exceedingly tough. It's not possible for the Psychic Cultivators Association to find them like searching for a needle in a haystack. Especially for those with mediocre talent, who show no special traits other than occasionally experiencing unique hallucinations, they are even harder to find. And even when they are found, the Psychic Cultivators Association sometimes faces competition. For instance, the tribunal is quite fond of snatching away the talented individuals. A significant number of tribunal members adamantly believe that spiritual energy users pose a great danger. Paradoxically, they also like to capture some and train them into witch hunters and judges. All these reasons combined make the theoretical situation of one spiritual energy gifted individual per million turn into the actual situation of the Psychic Cultivators Association finding only one potential individual per 10 million. In reality, half of the spiritual energy users trained by the Psychic Cultivators Association are sourced from the search for individuals with spiritual energy talent, and the other half are artificially cultivated through certain extremely costly secret techniques. This approach is utterly cost ineffective and can only be afforded by some elite individuals, mainly aimed at granting themselves or their relatives and descendants an extra bit of special power. As long as the elites are willing to pay, the Psychic Cultivators Association would provide the method and then recruit them. It's an opportunity to develop their membership and foster connections, so why not? The spiritual energy talent that Gu Heng's predecessor possessed came about in this way. Going by the standard ratio, the theoretical maximum for Rage Owl Star's population of 55 million would be finding only about 50 spiritual energy users. But obviously, this problem did not apply to Gu Heng. He hadn't even resorted to forcibly reforming people in the divine realm yet. By just exploiting the training functions provided by the army batch system and conducting selections among a large pool of candidates, he identified over 100 individuals, which was more than double the theoretical ratio. This could be attributed to two possible reasons. Firstly, the initial theoretical research of the Psychic Cultivators Association itself was not perfect, and this figure was a probability event of a large sample size. When applied to specific cases, every person could potentially manifest spiritual energy talent. Secondly, the unique environment of Rage Owl Star naturally thins the veil of reality, leading to a higher incidence of individuals with spiritual energy talent than normal. But all in all, this was a positive development. Gu Heng didn't choose to train all 100 individuals who possessed spiritual energy talent. Training a single spiritual energy user cost 100 points of grace. Training 100 would cost 10,000 points, which was too expensive. Although he had accrued 26,000 points over half a year due to Karolia's continuous warfare and monthly grace point rewards, Gu Heng was unwilling to spend them all at once. Excluding 20 or 30 individuals who were unsuitable due to age or physical issues, he only trained 50, another 20 were placed in the Mage Academy to learn at their own pace, without hurry. He wanted to first see the actual effect the spiritual energy group could achieve, then decide whether to keep it as it was or to expand its scale in the future. Speaking of the Psychic Cultivators Association, the combination of these two had given Gu Heng another surprise. He was now an official member of the Psychic Cultivators Association, and his status was quite decent. Therefore, within the scope of his access, he found something of great interest among some documents: spiritual energy teleportation. This was a spell, or rather a training method, that enabled spiritual energy users to master this ability, teleporting themselves or others over uncertain distances with variable precision. Moreover, it was possible to inscribe the corresponding arrays, combining the powers of multiple spiritual energy users for group teleportation. Usually, training a spiritual energy user to master this technique was very time-consuming. But among the spiritual energy talents found on Rage Owl Star, there were 2 individuals with space-related spiritual energy talents. They naturally met the requirements for using this ability, and Gu Hang selected Danny Dress, the one with better talent. After completing the training, there were only 3 individuals who possessed C-level spiritual energy abilities, while all the rest were at D level, and Dress was one of them. The former was equivalent to the spiritual energy intensity Gu Hang had at level 3, while the latter only had the strength he possessed at level 1. Worth additional mention was that Gu Hang also found a person with spiritual energy talent within the Phoenix, namely Henrik Larsson. His talent was actually average, but becoming an interstellar warrior seemed to stimulate his talent, as if it made him one of the 3 who possessed C-level spiritual energy strength, and also enabled the Phoenix battle group to have the capacity to establish a think tank. Some Starfighter battle groups have the position of think tank, representing the spiritual energy force within the group. Phoenix had it before, but it wasn't valued nor strong. Setting aside the think tank of a battle group with only 1 member for now, at least Gu Hang's Storm Mage Corps was thus established. And at the moment, using the spiritual energy teleportation array, they had a critical effect. The anti-air system of Stefano's Royal City wasn't something Wind Falcon could directly break through, and airborne drops were unreliable, but teleportation posed no problem. Wind Falcon landed with them tens of kilometers outside Stefano's capital, and they approached the city on foot, followed by a teleportation spell that sent the interstellar warriors and spiritual energy users together into the fortress castle, after which the massacre began. The entire kingdom was decapitated, greatly advancing the progress of the war. Not only did the other kingdoms of the Hagian Star not react in time, but even the kingdom of Stefano itself was caught off guard. While the King's Council was still discussing how many reinforcements to assemble and the proportion of contributions from each family, when Stefano's own army of over 1 million had not completed their mobilization and assembly, the war was essentially over. The Alliance forces didn't attempt to occupy the entire territory of the Kingdom of Stefano. The area was too vast and populated, and the Alliance couldn't possibly disperse their precious forces. They merely spent about half a month striking in various places, wiping out several stubborn resistance forces. As long as they could leave the Kingdom of Stefano headless, that was enough. The Alliance didn't immediately pursue establishing a reliable control here, only needing to ensure that no other ruling powers existed in this place. This was actually hard to maintain for the long term, as something always fills a power vacuum. But temporary control was sufficient for now. As for the remaining million-strong army of the Kingdom of Stefano, it had already collapsed.